Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first pages. That's not really first pages critique that I am going to be doing. I had this wacky idea and, vague regrets. I mean, kind of. You guys brought it. I had over 300 of you email me, which is why it took me so long to go through. And yet, okay. So we're going to go through 9. And you're like, only 9. It took me 6 to 8 hours to line edit and kind of do notes on those pages. I'm going to be screen sharing. We're going to go through. I'm going into editor mode. I'm not a professional editor or an agent or anything like that, but I have a lot of experience with critique partnering, working with people who have had big publishing deals, and then of course author mentor match, going through subs. So I'm like a window into maybe how an agent might look at these pages as well. I won't be sharing queries, though I did ask people to share like a pitch or a query so that I had a little bit of context going in. And there are a lot of cases here where I'm mentioning context. Context honestly helps. And an agent's always going to have that context of what you submit to them. So kind of bear that in mind. We're going to talk about that. Thank you for the compliments about my hair and my makeup. My hair, I finally bought a diffuser for blow drying it to actually get this to do something. And I'm using the new ColourPop So Jaded palette. I'm experimenting with all the different colors. It's very interesting. And I'm matchy with my top. All right. So I think it makes the most sense to just dive in. We're going to try screen sharing. I think I have to share my whole screen. So while I'm in the Word doc, I won't be able, and screen sharing, I'm not going to be able to come and see your comments. So I'm going to have to go back and forth. So if you have like a burning question, wait until I come back to the chat. It's just when I tested screen sharing, I can't do both at the same time. Anyway, so all right, we're going to do this. I'm a little scared. Just be warned, because I haven't done this before. I also streaming by myself is very, very strange. I kind of like it when I'm in streams with other people. There's something to kind of play off. So just bear with me. We're gonna try it. Okay. Right. Okay. So for a minute, it's gonna look really, really funny, because I have to pick the share your entire screen option to share Word. So you're going to see like multiple windows of Windows for just a second. Ooh, spooky, because we're going to go here. Okay. So I just basically put them all into a Word doc, and I kind of put comments. I'm going to go through, the comments are kind of there to guide me to what I want to say, but also what I want the writer to see, what I would say to a writer if I were giving notes, and also what I want you to see. So this one is an adult romance called The Ones I Left Behind by Shy Wright. And this was one that grabbed me right away. I had a query with it, so I kind of had an idea of the concept. But for me, I highlighted here this. Rule number 1, always check your caller ID. Rule number 2, never answer unknown numbers. Rule number 3, block anyone who can't catch a hint after 5 unanswered or I put in a little edit suggestion, unreturned phone calls or text messages. Immediately, I'm like, what does this mean? This is just one example of kind of a cute, hooky approach that, it definitely pulled me in. The rules are not subject to change. And then you get into realizing this is the philosophy of the main character. This is very voicey. It's very hooky. And I just kind of highlighted this whole opening here just really grabbed me. I love the voice right here. This is a great example when someone's asking, well, what do you mean by voice? Keith, my current are we, aren't we, parentheses, we're not, that's voice, only has 2 phone calls left before I block him. I'm hoping he'll bow out like a gentleman. He is a nice guy on paper, checks all the boxes. What no. So this is a suggestion that I had, because I kind of, and with a lot of these, I read through them, I did my first impression notes, but then I jumped back up in some cases, and this is a good example of where I did jump back up, where I wanted to be firmly aware of who the main character was and where they were. And my suggestion is to ground the reader in the present scene, because this does have down here when you get here, some quotes. It's actually a flashback, and that's why I suggest grounding the reader right here as to where the speaker is, the main character. Give a little bit, not too much, because you don't want to pull out of this really hooky opening, just so then when you get down here, I love the checklist, to here, where it's like a mini flashback to the day before, the reader kind of is grounded in the fact that that's a flashback. Okay. I'm just like reminding myself of my notes. Oh yeah, this is just a tiny suggestion to break something out as a separate bullet point so that there was, they were all very similar lengths, because this originally was up here and it was just a really long 2-sentence bullet point. It's just a style thing. This is because I talk about echoes a lot in videos where I just deleted this because it's not like a critical thing, like, oh no, you used a word twice, but I deleted it in one place so that it was more effective in another, because I just prefer the way it was in the other. And then with my suggestion of grounding this in the present, just I put a little suggestion that this is another place to kind of remind, like explaining my idea that maybe she's in bed and that's what brings her into this flashback. I love this little mini flashback dialogue exchange. Tony, now that we're going steady, who says that, right? It's just, again, voice. I already feel like I know this character. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit cynical. I like this character already, although I also know that this character definitely has a chip on her shoulder. There's a barrier there. She's keeping herself at arm's length from the men in her life. I want to know why. Of course, it's a romance, a rom-com, so you assume that it's going to be part of the plot. It's interesting. This is just a tiny little thing that I put a note. There were quotes around these words, and by barely, I mean never. And I just said, I think it's more effective in this particular instance without quotes. These are kind of little things and preferential style things. When you get notes, always know that they are like just ideas. But my philosophy, in case you don't know, when I work with an editor, certainly an editor and certainly with my agent, I do 80 to 90% of what they suggest, especially things that I don't find offensive or frustrating. I'm just like, that's not a bad suggestion. And then I fight on the really important stuff. All right. So I just had a little note here to add like another little bit of flashback here potentially to sprinkle it into this, which is just a very kind of meaty paragraph of like explaining how the character felt. So like a tiny opportunity for a tiny flashback of show within it. And similarly here, that I might do this particular summary as dialogue, going with the same suggestion from above. And then I had a suggestion here to have this line dangling on its own, because it is basically a punch in the face. When I got dressed and told him I was leaving, he said I was an emotionally unavailable tease who would probably die alone. That needs to like hang by itself. You want the reader to stop on that line. And you definitely want to think when you're writing, and this isn't, you kind of get used to doing this when you're first drafting, but it's really an editing thing otherwise. And my agent taught me some of this as well when we were doing pacing edits. Like really think about how the reader's eye is going to move over the page and where you want them to stop and like really take something in. So don't be afraid to have certain things kind of on their own lines for punch. Right. I had a little suggestion here because it had, which I'm sure are increasing in desperation and frustration. And I suggested really making it super simple so that when you describe the escalation, you don't need to say that it's an escalation of desperation. It's right there. And I just suggested also here, because this is still a lot of deep flashback and explanation, just to pop in little physical reminders of where the character is. I spitballed some suggestions. Maybe she gets out of bed and gets dressed. Maybe she takes a swig of wine. Maybe she puts away her phone, though in the next bit of scene, her phone's in the other room, so that one's not going to work. But just to kind of ground the reader in the present again. And I suggested this as another great reason to place to tie into the present, that their plans for tonight are canceled, and maybe contrast that. Maybe she's in her PJs. So essentially the idea is that in this opening scene to consistently ground it in the present so that it doesn't feel like it's all flashback or I hesitate to use the word info dumping. It didn't feel like info dumping. It felt more like a deep flashback, even though it's only a day. And then we've already grounded it in the present so that right here, when it jumps to the present, reader's already kind of in it. I just had a little note here. There's multiple references that clearly this character's favorite color is blue, her guitar is blue, her hair is bright blue, and just maybe explain it. It could be a nice little character detail. Just some simplifying of the sentence here. Okay, so this is a really good example of being thoughtful about how you write a sudden action. And I don't claim to be an expert in this. It comes up all the time in thrillers, and sometimes I think I'm okay at it, and sometimes I don't. But this kind of buries the lead, or kind of yes, I open my eyes and shriek, suffering from an acute heart attack. Now, what has actually happened is my roommate, Kenya, stands in front of me, hands on her hips, the other waving a cell phone in my face. She's been startled, but something about like describing it like I open my eyes and shriek, suffering from an acute heart attack is just burying kind of the, it's not a cliffhanger, but it's like a sudden moment of action where you can snap the reader to attention. And I might just rephrase it to be a little more active. I don't have a perfect suggestion on it, but that was kind of my note on that line. Here, description of her roommate, her high yellow skin. I don't know what that means, so I'm having trouble picturing it. So that's just a note that I'm not quite sure. And then just a note that because it says her high yellow skin is flushed red, and then it was originally, comma, black, wide-rimmed glasses, like going to describe the glasses, but it was like yellow, red, and black in quick succession. And I wasn't sure what I was supposed to focus on. I added an and to separate the idea so you know that we're moving on to the glasses, and then it goes into her hair. But this is one where I might break up the description of the roommate because that's a lot of details to take in a single sentence. Here, I put an example, obviously, like make it your voice, not mine, but I would lead with, I would reverse the idea basically and not have her lead with the phone, but have her lead with the grading papers, and then get into the phone. So we have a little bit of backstory here. And my suggestion here is to use this as a nice organic way to ground the reader in the time. Because you're saying they met in college. And obviously the main character has ended up moving from New York to Chicago. Why? You can slip in a tiny bit of context. I'm like, did she fail in New York? Did something bad happen? Can you hint at it? So I did a suggested little rewrite. Now, X years later, this gives us an idea. Well, approximately how old are they? Anyone who is familiar with US college and like how old you are when you graduate can do the quick math, which is helpful. And it's also just an opportunity to vary the sentence structure a little, was my suggestion here as well. Talking to myself without seeing your comments is really, really weird, guys. We're almost done, and I'm going to come and see what you have to say. Here, I prefer to lead with action. It just the kind of the succession of ideas, and it just wasn't kind of working for me here. You also don't necessarily have to say this. It can be implied that she's put her guitar away. And then I highlighted all these rooms because they're echoes. Though here I actually kind of did some deletions and suggested rewrites to get rid of some of these echoes anywhere, but there were originally those 4. Just kind of be careful in a short space of time, repeating the same word over and over again, and find ways to do it differently. So I loved this idea. Kenya thinks she's an HGTV show host, and our living space reflects that. Originally, it just basically said the colors up here, impeccably decorated in charcoal gray, navy blue, and rose pink. But I would use the opportunity of HGTV, basically decor porn, to like have a short but like all out little description, something that's really going to give someone a visual. So I kind of rejigged it. Charcoal grays, navy blues, and rose pinks augment the insert whatever specific design thing you want to go for. I threw out some random words I know. Mid-century modern, French country classic. Like really don't be afraid to be extra descriptive or pick a piece of furniture, something that's really going to give the reader a sense of what this means, what Kenya's style is. I also just really like describing things. So, and then especially because the contrast is that her room basically has nothing in it. So that I kind of cut it off there because I don't want to go too long on any of these. Too late. So I'm going to briefly stop sharing so I can come back to your comments. How's it going? How'd I do on the first one? Let me back up and see what I missed. Also, if it wasn't clear, I love the voice in those pages. It's such a good example of how to do voice the adult rom-com, and kind of definitely what I think agents would be looking for. I'll just throw in some of these. It's very, very true. That's what I felt about the voice too. If I read all of these, I'm going to be really honest. We will be here for 5 hours and we just can't do that. I'm doing up to like 8 or 9 pages for some of these. I will read as much as I can when I'm pulling out an example, but I can't read all of the pages. It's just, and I know that's not as good for those who are visually impaired. And I apologize for that kind of wrench in the works. It's just like, I did think about that, and I either would have to only critique like 3 things and read them exactly. And as it is, I'm only doing 9, which just doesn't feel like a lot. Right. I can definitely zoom in, though. I already have it zoomed in a bit. I always read it 130% because my eyes are not what they used to be. This is a good note. And this is certainly an example of I knew it was off, but I didn't know why. And this is why it can definitely be important to have people who are more familiar with things. And these are things that a reader or an agent or an editor can miss or then catch if they have context. So there's a couple other ones where there are examples where I point out, at least to the best of my knowledge, where one has to be a little bit careful about how you describe a person's skin color or ethnicity. So. See, things I don't know, and it's good to know. I wasn't sure. It just with this suggestion, I'd have to ask permission from the authors and if they would be okay with it, and they might. And in fact, if they are okay with it, I could upload this after this stream. But I would feel like really weird, like giving access to their writing without their permission, as well as my notes. All right. Okie dokie. I think unless you have specific questions, I can dive into the next one, which is a YA fantasy. I think it's YA fantasy. It's definitely fantasy. All right. And I will try to read as much as possible, and I will try to zoom in. Oh, so here's a good question. How did I select the pieces? Honestly, it was overwhelming when I got all of them. I did what a skipper around our agent might do. I just looked for interesting subject lines, genres, titles that were interesting. I looked at the query and the pitch to see if it was like kind of interesting to me. Not that that's a required prerequisite, though I did pick things that are all kind of interesting to me. And then I just started reading the pages, and it was kind of, does this like jump out to me, but also do I have anything instructive or helpful to say? Like I had to actually have something I wanted to demonstrate that I thought could be helpful to more than one person. So, yeah. I know nothing about short stories. I can't write them. I don't really read them. I would be the worst person probably to offer any expertise on short stories other than basic, you know, in some ways all fiction follows some of the same ideas and guidelines, but I'm just really not strong in short stories. So, all right. So for the time being, I'm just going to jump back in, select myself, double vision here. All right. See, I already have it 130 because, you know, my eyes suck. Okay, YA fantasy. The first line is Prince Ash did not think preventing murder would be this dull. So I had two suggestions here. The first was did not think. I thought had not anticipated might just be a tiny bit punchier. And also here, preventing murder, there was just something about it that pinged for me, and you asked how I chose these. First lines are really interesting. I love first lines, and definitely I thought about first lines, and when I saw this first line, I immediately was like, I can have a suggestion for this. And preventing murder, and I read further to get context, someone is going to be assassinated in this context. So my suggestion was preventing an assassination would be slightly better. I'm still not convinced it's perfect. I know the punch that this opening line is going for. It's meant to kind of jar the reader a little bit. So I put the suggestions I did to kind of hopefully punch up that language a bit, but I'm not completely happy with my own ideas. But that was kind of my note there. So next here, the original line was, he did not know what he expected. And it was all one line, an action-packed chase on horseback, perhaps, or a duel with swords and spells, enchantments, and blades clashed against each other, but it was not this. My suggestion was to break this up a little. This is also, it helps the reader. It's also a voice thing, and in fairness, I acknowledge it is a voice thing. You don't have to write like me. But regardless, I like following it up with what had he expected? Complete thought that makes the reader transition, and then it's the series, an action-packed chase on blah, blah, blah. And then I just fixed the grammar to work with that new construction idea. So here, just little grammar fixes here. This sentence tripped me up, the original, which was his legs were scrunched up under him. His left foot fallen asleep, as he would like to do, and hold on, I'm looking at my trying to get the original sentence out of my edits. And the dampness of the earth seeped through the thick coat he wore on top of his layers of hanfu. That is a lot of separate ideas in one sentence, which is a theme I caught in a couple of these. In these cases where you're putting separate, but you're both doing a little bit of play-by-play, trying to have physical detail in there, but you're also trying to fit in extra ideas. I was super confused specifically by the left foot fallen asleep as he would like to do, and then transitioning to the coat being wet. I was like, whiplash. So my suggestion was to break it up to try to make it more clear. And I'm not ultimately even happy with my suggestions, but the point is, just so that the author knows, I was definitely confused when I read it, and I read it 3 or 4 times trying to figure out exactly how to rephrase it. And I came up with, you don't need to say his legs are scrunched up under him. That's a physical detail that I don't think adds anything to it. His left foot had long ago fallen asleep, and Ash found himself jealous of his slumber. That's my silly little suggestion. You don't have to do that exactly. He longed for sleep, breaking up the ideas, but was too uncomfortable to catch a wink. Again, my voice, you can shift that. The damp earth seeped through the thick coat he wore on top of his layers of hanfu. By breaking that up and not saying dampness, it's damp. It's a more specific, direct idea. I just think that's a stronger succession of ideas and image. So next we transition into dialogue, and the original was Shinmu, he said to his bodyguard beside him, "Are you certain tonight is the night?" I reversed this. Definitely be a little bit careful of a little too obviously trying to tell the reader someone's name. I said this might be an example of, well, you know, Bob. much stronger to dive right into dialogue. Are you certain tonight is the night? That's more direct and interesting. He said to his bodyguard beside him. Then in the next one, when it says, yes, master, Shinmu said in a matter-of-fact way, the reader's going to know that that is the bodyguard and that is her name. So here I pointed out a little echo of only. He could only see a silhouette of her in the dark, but her solid presence was the only thing that made the weight bearable. But then I cut was the only thing that... because it's stronger if you're a little bit more direct here. Then it continues on, and then here he parries and says, no, I want to be here. And my suggestion is to circle back to that hook, the voice and the essentially humor in that opening hook. And I put a suggestion of, at least he had when he thought a would-be assassination would be more exciting and shorter, reinforcing the idea he wanted to be here, but now he's miserable. It's taking a long time. And then, because the next idea was that him spinning a fringe flower in boredom. And there are ways to kind of just punch up these ideas. Okay, so next to this sample, I'm definitely not going to read all of this because my suggestion to the author is to cut it. It goes into a lot of backstory. So hold on, I actually stopped highlighting at a certain point. It is... a lot of it's like a page and a half of deeper backstory of context as to what is happening. I don't recommend you go into this so soon. You're on your first page. It's way too soon to do that, especially to do a jump like 3 months ago. Ash noticed the letters he exchanged, blah, blah, blah. Stay in the present, stay in the action. You have the reader hooked. I mean, I'm definitely interested. I'm like, okay, who's going to be assassinated? So yes, we do want to know this information, but don't do deep backstory. Find ways to sprinkle in this information, either through pointed dialogue, but not overly expository dialogue. Yes, I know that is challenging. And or move forward in the scene and you sprinkle in the context the reader is going to need as you move through the active scene. This is all still deep backstory. No, so it's like 2.5 pages. Including deep backstory of flashback to dialogue. And I know I mentioned flashback to dialogue in the next one. You do have to be very, very careful with how much flashback dialogue you do and how deep you drop a reader into a flashback, because it can definitely be jarring, but especially in the first paragraph. Okay, so now we're back to the present. That was about 2.5 pages. It's just too much in my personal opinion. That's where you might lose an agent, basically. Ash blew air out of the side of his mouth, so we're back into the present. And here I went pretty light because my main suggestion is to cut all of that deeper backstory. Just another example of an echo. 2 figures, she whispered back. He could barely make out the figures. Find just another way to describe it. It might even be rejigging the sentence a little bit, and it's never a bad thing to rejig your sentence structure to make it more interesting. Challenging yourself to kind of eliminate those repetitions is what kind of pushes your writing to the next level. Okay, so obviously my line level notes were kind of light here, so I'll just read over my note. Basically, that on page 1 or 2, diving into backstory, what I said is that it's too soon because I don't care yet. I've started to care about the characters. I like the main character. I like his voice. I'm even intrigued by his bodyguard because I know from reading the query that his bodyguard is important. Build that up more. Build up the relationship. Find ways to work in some of the world building and the backstory through active, present storytelling. And of course, I want to know who they're there to protect, but you have to work that in. So my suggestion here, which again, be very, very delicate with, well, you know, Bob, is maybe they do discuss their plan one more time. I just basically, I need to be invested in the conflict and the stakes of the scene. And this is personally, I'm not a reader who likes to be put into backstory right away. I'm just not going to. I was a little confused at first when it made the transition, essentially. So let me come back to y'all. I tried to read more. I hope it was better. Catching up on chat is so hard. All right, I think I found it. For future critiques, because I have basically labels in my inbox. I labeled a lot more things to potentially do than I was able to do. Yes, I would email you. And because of how much time has passed, if people have revised their first pages, they're welcome to email those back through. Just reply to the original email chain, because I'm all about organization in my Gmail inbox. That said, because it is so time intensive, I wouldn't do another one of these till November. So. Here's a suggestion for that. And that's the thing. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to see it. And like, it's the same idea. It's the same punch, just trying some different variations on the words. Yeah, that's why I suggested it too. And assassination is high stakes, and you want to inject those high stakes immediately. So. This is another really great suggestion. Yeah, see? And in general, like, because we're going to look at a lot of different opening lines, like, I personally, this is definitely subjective, I love the punchy first line that makes you kind of go like that and then gets you wanting to read. I mean, me too. I do it as well. Like, I'm calling myself out. And it's not all the time. It's just in certain places, especially in the beginning, when you want to grab them, you have to be very careful with being a little too stylistic and long in the beginning, within reason. All right, still scanning your comments. Sorry, I know it's this is why I like to chat with other people, because otherwise there's like these moments of dead air. Okay, this is a great question. So I called it first pages, and I asked for first pages, except then I said, actually, y'all, you can send me 10 pages. And the reason I did that is most agents allow you to send up to 10 pages, and I wanted it to mirror querying as closely as possible. I wanted to see what an agent would see so that I could give you an impression of what an agent might respond to. Because sometimes just a first page is too limiting, to be honest. And so with most of these, I mean, with all of them, I went more than a page, but I didn't do the full 10 pages with any of them because it's too much. Also, because, full disclosure, line editing is not my favorite, in large part because it's so time intensive. To line edit well, you have to really take care and dig into the work. And y'all, my job is so stressful right now, so I'm so sorry this took so long. It's just, but I like the end result of line editing. I love getting an essence of a story and helping people. It's just in the moment. So, like, to give you an idea, like, these 9 took me 6 to 8 hours of work, because I wanted to really read them and give them my fair consideration. I read a ton in the inbox. That also includes sorting through the inbox and so on. This is a good question. If the hook is intriguing, but the prose writing isn't smooth, will that instantly turn the agent off? It's honestly really going to depend agent to agent and depend on how good that hook is. I'd say it's not if the hook is intriguing. If the hook is fire, you can get a lot more forgiveness for writing that isn't smooth, because agents don't want perfect, well, most agents don't want perfect writing. So it kind of just depends. And it also depends on what that means by not smooth, because there's a difference between it's not perfect writing and it has a lot of errors. Meaning, if it's the kind of thing where it's going to stop the agent enough that they're going to struggle to finish it, it won't matter if the hook is fire. But admittedly, if your hook is fire, I think it does get you a little bit of latitude from agents. Most aren't expecting perfection, though. There are only a couple of agents I can think of, and I can barely even like specifically call to mind their names, who I know are not editorial, who essentially sub the books that they pick up from the query inboxes, which means they only sign polished work. It's pretty rare. No, not anymore. I have trusted critique partners who I'll still do stuff for, but I don't do outside critiques. I would fall into a pit of despair and just like drown in work if I did that. And I just don't have the emotional or bandwidth or time. I do enjoy it, which is why I still do it for select critique partners like friends. But I can't do it that often. Did any of the subs strike you as, wow, this is definitely query ready? Yes, a few of them. I was genuinely impressed with what all of y'all sent me. That's what made this so hard, and also hard in the sense that like some of them were so good. I was like, oh, I don't know what to say. And a few of them, I'm like, gosh, I want them to get an agent, but if they don't, I really hope they enter author mentor match. I'm impressed with all y'all, honestly. And you will see some of the ones that I chose here. I chose in part because they are a very good example of the voice hooked me immediately, plus high concept premise, with some suggestions I'm giving, like the first one, to just like maybe zhuzh it up a bit. But several of these I definitely think are query ready with some work. But some of them aren't done, I'm aware. So do the big five publishers ever take unsolicited manuscripts, or do they have to come from an agent? I'd say right now, 95% of the time they have to come from an agent. Several big fives, specific editors did open their inboxes, but only to Black creators in June, and some of them are still open. Tor has regular open submissions. I think it's once or twice a year. They're one of the exceptions. Swoon Reads, I think, is still up and going. That's Macmillan. That's open submissions, but I mean through a website. It's rare, but it does sometimes happen. But it is pretty rare. You most of the time need an agent. So honestly, you want an agent to protect your interests anyway. So even if you did get to directly submit, if they wanted to publish you, you would need to get an agent. Because if you give a publisher an inch, they will take a mile, and that's what agents are there to protect you on. Most agents will set up to 10, but some do 5, but I'd say 10 is average. So, I mean, polish your whole book, but especially think about what is happening in your first 10 pages. Most of the time when I see query guidelines, it's 10 pages. How has it been 37 minutes? I should probably do the next page. All right, I'm going to do it. So this is a YA queer rom-com called Callum At Last. The author wished to be anonymous. This is an example, one of the ones I pulled out. The voice pulled me in. I did want to highlight this, but there are a couple little things with this one, but I'll read the beginning. Tommy's got an infuriating talent for making me do things I don't want to do. I can tell when it's coming because he gets this look in his eyes that says, I figured out a way to make my life better by making yours temporarily worse. A few things I've done for Tommy since we met. And my suggestion here originally, it said consequences in brackets. You don't have to call that out because it's implied, and I think it's stronger without. And actually, another example, I think this does work very well in the rom-com space. The bullet pointed list as for kind of hookiness in voice, second one to use this. Also, perhaps it's just something I like, and that's why I was drawn to them. I'll read through these just for fun. Forge a sick note from his mom. The school called her to check, and I got detention. I removed your semicolons because you don't need the punctuation in this list format. I'm at least not in America. Something that's going to come up with this one is I'm going to point out American versus British grammar / copy editing rules, just as a note to the author who is British, that should they submit to American agents and sell here, that then they'd have to look at them. It's fine for the British market. Tell his dad the gay porn magazine under his bed was mine. Steve hasn't looked me in the eye since. The consequences made me giggle for sure. Bleach his hair. Also bleached my eyeball and spent 6 hours in A&E. So this is one of my first note about the UK versus the US market. I know what this is. I'm an Anglophile, but I know a copy editor would highlight this and say either you have to, at the first instance, say what this is. I think that's accident and emergency. That's what it's written out for. Or if you publish in the US, I would say emergency room. even though it's set in the UK. At least, actually, they might let you do it. It depends. I mean, no, I'm not going to use Harry Potter as an example. We don't talk about that anymore. Sing a duet with him for the school talent show, forgot the words, tried to run off the stage, and fell down the stairs in front of 300 people. Okay, so this is another nitpicky American thing. Brits use single M dashes, and here Americans we use double, and I just threw in a funny note. It made me twitch. It really doesn't matter, but it did. And so it just continues on. Again, I pulled this out for voice. Okay, so here the line is, whoa, that sounds dramatic. I'm not saying literally no one cares about me. And my note is, because it's true, I'm very on the fence about breaking the fourth wall. You can do it and you can get away with it, but it's definitely a stylistic choice. And this is one where it would depend on the style of the entire book as well as the market. I feel like the author likely knows the British YA rom-com market better than I do. Perhaps this is common there, but it's almost a little too cinematic. And it could go either way. I'm not sure I like it, but that doesn't mean get rid of it. So we have dialogue here. I won't read all of it. I will start reading here at my next note. So I'll just start reading some of this. So Tommy wants him to go out to a club with him. And he says, but you owe me. I stop dead. Tommy takes a couple more steps before he realizes, then turns to face me. We're positioned for a duel in the middle of the schoolyard. I love that. Great visual image. I owe you, I ask. Actually, extra note, you don't necessarily have to say I ask. It kind of stands on its own with the question mark, but that's, if you want to. I've done that too. Please tell me how I owe you, I say, cocking my head to one side. Who invited you to have lunch on the first day of secondary school when you were crying in a toilet cubicle? That was 6 years ago. I wasn't crying. I was taking a few private deep breaths. So here's the thing where I have another note. Are you kidding? You were snotting like that girl in the Blair Witch Project. So I know from reading the query this author sent that this is set in the 90s. And this is the first kind of period reference. It's so weird to think of my childhood as a period reference to the 90s. And my question mark here is, I don't know about the UK market, but in the US YA market, near historical is really, really, really difficult to sell, because the question you're always going to get from an agent is, why is this set in the near past? And if the answer is because I don't want to deal with technology, or it's when I was in high school, 85 to 90% of the time, that's going to turn off an agent, and it's the agents you have to consider first. But also it can be really jarring for readers, and you have to remember, like, the kids reading this literally weren't born. Sorry, I just have to sit with that for a minute, but it's true. You need a very, 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 very good reason to be near historical. But that said, I don't know the British YA market as well as the author might. If this is a thing in the British YA market, ignore me, but it's definitely really hard to do in the US YA market. And so I kind of hesitate. That said, reading this, because there's so many great British queer movies from the 90s, and I got all those vibes from this sample. It's definitely nailing those vibes. It's doing what it sets out to do, but that was definitely a question mark that I had. I'm not going to read this out loud because it's vulgar, but it made me laugh out loud. I just don't want to say it on the live stream. I apologize because demonetization, but if you are comfortable reading the on-screen text, that made me laugh out loud, and I wanted the author to know that. Specifically, it was Alfred Hitchcock, you utter Philistine. That, I literally guffawed a bit at that. It's always good to make people laugh. Oh, here, where did I thought I put in this note, but it's here, so I'm going to talk about it right here. So this is another British versus American thing. And again, just knowing who you're querying and knowing where you're going to be published. And if you get an American deal, the copy editor will change this for you. In US style, it's Mr. Period Finn. And I know in the UK that it's not. It's just a note. This is just like a little thing. I learned a new word, a very British word, brim with wreck. I had to look it up and I was delighted to learn it, but saying an American copy editor slash editor might make you change that to caution. I love this metaphor. I'm just going to read it out loud. If I was actually in an American teen movie, I'd play a very minor role and probably wouldn't have any lines. That is such a great little line for a YA. It immediately tells you everything you need to know about this character, not only who they are, but how they see themselves. So I appreciated that kind of pop culture. So for the most part, like, honestly, I just loved the voice in this sample. It's why I picked it, because I wanted to show a really strong example of voice in a YA contemporary. Here's another thing I loved. I will read this out. Just, it's not like people suddenly become responsible when they turn 18. I was more responsible at 8 than most 18-year-olds. I once took 21 penny sweets from the shop when I'd paid only for 20, and the guilt was so unbearable that I came back the next day with the shiniest penny I could find and a written apology. And just my note was, this MC is adorable and must be protected at all costs. Like, I love this character. And this is where I put in the note about the Mr. / Mrs. with a period. Yeah, my notes on this one were minor. I mostly picked this one to demonstrate voice because people are always asking about voice, and then the minor things about the historical and the British versus American that I wanted to share with the author. So this one it pulled me in with voice, details, the dialogue exchanges. This sample also uses little moments of flashback really well. And in fact, here's me. And I suggested Dairy Girls as a comp if they query the United States, because that we would get that if you keep it historical. So I should actually pull up a moment of flashback for you, since I said that it does it well. See, I'm remembering my own notes. Hold on. There was definitely some really good ones. Because it's hard to work in flashback and do it really, really well. Hold on. Bear with me. I apologize. Here, they have an exchange, and Tommy says, you can break the rules, you know. The universe isn't going to implode if you do one thing you're not 100% supposed to do. I do break rules, I say. Remember the time you made me pierce your ears? And this is just a great example of brief flashback that says so much about character. And it actually hints at the time again. It was year 9, and Tommy was going through his Boy George phase. He made me heat a drawing pin on a candle and push it through his earlobe. It bled a lot, and I fainted. I think that's a great little year thing. And actually, I missed it again in American versus British. If you'd have to convert whatever your 9 is, and I should know this, to whatever it would be for the US. Not directly, because obviously it's not the same. Maybe have a little age context there in lieu of the year in school, because Americans just aren't going to know what that is. So let me come back to y'all and see what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. That's like, you guys asked me how I picked things. Like, some of these I just picked because I wanted to read the pages. And that was an example where I was like, this voice is killing me. Thank you for Brit picking me. I'm so rusty. But it's definitely an example. Like, anytime I use an abbreviation, even ones I thought were super obvious in context, my copy editor would be like, you need to write this out the first time you use it in case people don't know what it is. That comes up a lot. Copy editors are there to nitpick your writing, but now I'm like aware of it when I draft, and I just do it in the first place to save myself the hassle later. Just seeing what y'all have to say, and then I'll try to bump along to the next one, since I knew this would take a long time, which is why when I only was able to do 9, I didn't freak out. Sorry. sketching up. See, I should do these in future with another person who talks to you guys while I browse your comments. That's a good idea. Let me know what you think of that. I could have guests on. Yeah, Dairy Girls is so good, but mostly it's something that American agents would have context for if this writer decides to query in the US and keep the historical setting. But I still, in the query, would really contextualize why it's important that it's set in the 90s, because that was just my number one question. There's another one I'm going to go through that's also historical, and so that question came up for that one as well, near historical. Near historical is just really hard, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree. I find, I mean, you know, because I lived through near history, I find it interesting. It's just hard to get away with. There is no way in heck I can do 300 submissions. It would be a full-time job, and it's just not possible. It took me 8 hours to do 9. So no, I just can't possibly do them all. I'm so sorry. I would die. Oh, man. As it is, like, I actually owe some teenagers comments on their college essays. I kind of had to prioritize this, so I'm juggling a lot. All right, I am going to jump into the next one. I think I've mostly caught up with y'all. There's a fly in my apartment. It's like a presidential debate. Okay. I didn't watch it, though. I find it too depressing. I know that makes me bad. Oh, right. So this is by Snow, City of Colors and Stars, which is a YA fantasy romance. So the original opening of this one is Nora liked to think she was smart and focused and that it would be very difficult for someone to trick her or make her do something she didn't want to do. But if the current situation was any indication, that was not true at all. So my note here is you can get away stylistically with a run-on-y first sentence, but not always. And this was a case where I just wasn't sold on it. And my suggestion was a rewrite that is half not workable because this is a fantasy and not set in the real world. But my example, nonetheless, was something more like, Nora was not smart. Forget her Harvard admission, a contrast. That was no indication. Parentheses, she couldn't afford to attend anyway. The whole reason she was here in the first place, that's context I have from the context from the query. No, Nora's brain had clearly temporarily shut down when she agreed to go inside a fortune teller's shop. It was silly. These are just like offhand suggestions of mine. Anytime I kind of rewrite a suggestions for people, I don't think the writer should just use what I wrote. Half the time I'm spitballing and it's not good. I just wanted to say that. But it's to give an idea of a different way to write this. That's kind of a little punchier, shorter, still voicey, but also has a little bit of context, because in the original sentence, but if the current situation was any indication, that was not true at all. Even though it is in the next line, I had this moment of like, what current situation? I have no context for this character. So you have to be also careful with first lines that are a little too leading in terms of, I guess, intent, but there's a lack of context. It's this thin line between teasing that you're going to lead them to the explanation very, very quickly and confusion. Let's see. So another reason, and I even call myself out there, this is a poor rewrite. Yes, it is. I'm not very good. I'm not a fantasy writer. So here, I didn't put this here, but one of the reasons I was drawn to this one is I love the idea of opening in a fortune teller shop, especially with the main character as a skeptic, which is why I added the line, it was silly, because you're already kind of setting up a stakes. It's not like life or death stakes, but it's certainly character stakes. The character's in a place they don't want to be, but you as the reader know they must be here for a reason. It's interesting. My note here was be careful with long sentences again. This one was just a little bit unwieldy, and my suggestion is to break it into 2 sentences. The original sentence is, Nora believed in a sort of mysticism of places and peoples and things. I like actually the repetition there. But she did not believe that people could read or see the future, and Madame Antoine was not helping her change her mind. That personally is one where I would do 2 sentences, but that's a stylistic thing. You are always welcome to throw out my suggestions. That's how it should always be with a good editor. They should never be too rigid. Okay, so my suggestion here was to, again, it's subjective, but I personally, again, was itching to break this up into some different sentence structure to also give a little bit of context. Originally, the line was, she had been telling Nora and her sister about the science of divination for the last 10 minutes, maintaining a smile the whole time, even when it looked unnatural. And there was something about that I want. It's similar to the last fantasy sample, where I wanted to break up disparate ideas so that they were stronger individually. And my suggestion was 10 minutes Nora had been stuck here with her rapt sister. You're grounding the character in the reader in the main character, but also giving the time context neatly there. I put rapt sister, though reading later in the sample, you'll see one of my notes is, I assumed the sister was into it, and that's why she suggested it. But later, it turns out her sister is skeptical too, and it's like a joke. So like I guess describe as needed there. Listening to Madame Antoine blather on about the science of divination. Period. Blather is just a strong kind of verb I like. It indicates how she is speaking without having to kind of say. And then I added the line, the smile Nora had pasted on surely looked unnatural. It definitely hurt her cheeks. Suggesting them kind of like, you're saying the same thing. I prefer it rephrased in this way. There's something about even when it looked unnatural that kind of took me out of the character a little bit. So here, there's an aside here about earrings. It reads, the golden earrings were small enough to not be seen from her waist-length hair, which made Nora really like them, but she resisted the urge to ask where she'd bought them. She's remarking on Madame Antoine's earrings. Now that she thought about it, she liked the fortune teller's outfit as well. She wore a long dress with a flower pattern, and her posture was surprisingly straight. I'm not sure we need this, was kind of my note. I was confused why we needed a long aside about the character liking her earrings and her clothes. I just don't know if you need that. I might move the scene along without the superfluous kind of navel-gazing details. Okay, so also because this compliments her, and then it switches to her skin flawless, and the madness showed in her brown eyes. Okay, maybe Nora was projecting, but seriously, who did this for a living when it was clear it was akin to fraud? I'm confused by the oscillating between two very conflicting ideas. I err more on the side of, if she's a skeptic, she's a skeptic. Yes, she can maybe think that her earrings are cute, but it was a little bit of a whiplash for me. And be very, very careful with using crazy or mad as a pejorative. I have a problem with this as well. I always have to catch myself, check myself. It's just kind of a little note that's definitely something that I just would be careful with it, especially with characters who are kind of made to be ridiculous. So this note, Madame Antoine made jazz hands on the table. I want to know, when is this set, and does jazz exist in this universe? Because this is a fantasy novel, and this is a great example. When you write something historical, you have to really be careful with idiomatic phrases that are rooted in our historical fact, and same thing with fantasy. If jazz doesn't exist and jazz hands don't exist, because that's Fosse, basically it's Fosse, you can't use it. So just be aware of that. Okay. Oh, this note, starting dialogue with O, be very, very careful of this speech pattern and echoes, like repeating it. I do this too, which is why I point this out. You can really only get away with them every once in a while. Otherwise, it really triggers as repetition. And like as the reader, it's like, why does she start every sentence with O? It's kind of a thing that we will often do in real life, that you have to be careful about how much you do it on the page. Again, calling myself out. I do that all the time. So my thing here is that this action tag felt a little bit belabored. The original was, Amelia said, Nora's sister sat beside her, sporting a stupid grin on her face that spoke of sheer entertainment. I think what probably threw me was the sheer entertainment part. And my suggestion was to be a little more straightforward with it. Nora's sister, Amelia, leaned forward with interest, sporting a stupid grin that spoke of sheer entertainment. You can still kind of keep that, but because I was trying to compromise, but something about it pinging me. And then I rewrote the next bit to be a little more dynamic. This whole outing had been Amelia's idea and was the last time Nora would give in to one of her sister's dares. In the last half hour, she had not only gotten Nora to dye her hair black, but also to walk through the beaded curtain that separated the hair salon from the fortune teller. This was a little rewrite where burying the time in the middle I thought was awkward, and it was better to put it at the front. Another O. Again, I do it all the time. So this is where I got confused, and you just have to think about your progression of characters and ideas when you're writing an opening. I thought from the beginning, given some of this is assumption, I assumed that you have the main character as a skeptic and the sister dragged her there. Certainly the sister's into it. And then I got here and I was confused. Amelia thought it was all bull, hence the dare. And Nora knew this was all pretend, but it felt nice to have someone seem so sure. So does she think it's bull? I would really clarify how you're positioning Amelia in this scene. This is just an example where you have Madame Antoine exclaimed. Just put an exclamation point on the text. You don't have to say Madame Antoine exclaimed. You could put some other kind of action tag here that might be more interesting to break up the dialogue if you want. But I think it's better that way. So here's one. Madame Antoine looked up, smiled, and patted her palm. This just seems like a good opportunity to maybe be a little bit, I said add flavor to it. How does she smile? Is there some kind of characterization you can get out of this? Especially because I'm someone who relies on smiling as a crutch, and there's a lot of it in here too, like calling myself out. So sometimes when you use it, if you're going to use it, make sure it's very specific. It's not just a smile. Figure out how they smile and use it as characterization. So this one, Nora turned to her sister, who looked confused by the interaction, but they shrugged it off, paid the fortune teller, and both got up to leave. So that's filtering, who looked confused. I'm not saying you have to get rid of it, except it feels a little bit belabored and a little bit play-by-play. I personally think this could potentially be rewritten to be a little bit more dynamic without the filtering. Just a thought. Okay, so here was just a note. It has a transition that reiterates information that we already know from previous information, and it's walking them through. It doesn't have the action of them walking through the space, which is what I would suggest. My suggestion is to really show instead of have this is essentially a blow by blow of something that technically the reader already got a nugget of. I would just rephrase this so it's a little bit more active. And then my final note here, one of my final notes, this is a note for a couple of the samples, and I think it's easy to do in third person in particular. The repetition of the sentence structure, which is noun, verb, which is a fine way to write. But if you'll note, some of my samples for like rejigging the writing is just varying the sentence structure just a teeny tiny bit and rearranging kind of where details go to make the writing a little more dynamic. I would just be kind of careful. And then I pointed out some tense shifting here. It's past tense, but then it goes into they will be studying there. And here I cut the rest. But my note is from here, the author went into several pages of backstory telling of like why they're here and how they ended up here. And as always, I would avoid that if at all possible. You want to use forward action. In this case, the sisters are walking to their aunt's house through the streets of this fabulous city. Show us that and pepper in little details of the backstory as you move through that forward scene. Especially as the reader, so they're starting in the fortune teller's shop, and I kind of skipped over it and didn't read it. She basically tells her that she's going to meet like a dark and handsome stranger, and he's going to change her life, and he's going to be powerful. And the fortune teller gets a little bit spooked, and that's kind of the tension in this scene. As the reader, you're going to want to move them as quickly as possible without too much flashback or deep backstory or telling to whatever the cliffhanger of the chapter is going to be. That's just my suggestion. Wherever possible, avoid deep backstory in your first chapter, basically. We pop back to y'all. See what you're saying. Feel like I'm getting better at being fast. It's hard, though. This is a good note. Yeah, y'all are smart and you say things better than I can. This is kind of what I mean. It's like it's not a bad writing style, but you can get a little bit more of character if you make a couple of choices in key places to break up sentences and ideas and like add a little bit of color to it. And the thing is, like, think about your opening, your first pages, your first couple chapters. Once you establish certain ideas and visuals and whatnot, you don't have to work as hard for the rest of the book. It's all about just kind of setting up the reader at the very beginning to make it easy for yourself later. I love that y'all are chatting in the chat and it's like y'all are having a conversation. I love this. This is a great question. Yeah, personally, if it's set in a fantasy world, China can't be the word you use for dishes because China shouldn't exist. So that's another great example. We don't realize how many of the things that we have are rooted in our specific history or brands. Like, for example, Kleenex is a brand. You have to say tissues, not Kleenex. But always also consider in a fantasy world, would this thing even exist in the context of this world? Hold on, I'm just scrolling and then I want to get to the next one since I want to pop along on this. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope it's helpful. But like it definitely, I feel like I'm looking at these similar to how an agent would look, like where you stop, where you get confused. And it's all of these, I picked them because I thought they were interesting. And it's all just about kind of next level. And the place, and I am noting the places where I stopped and why. And in a, as you know, in a couple of cases, like as soon as it switches to deep backstory, I'm out, honestly, as a reader. And that could be me, but I know I'm not the only one. There are going to be agents who feel the same way as well. All right, so I'm just going to jump into the next one. So this is Death Becomes Him by Zoe. So one of my notes, my upfront note, we're just going to dive right in. It is labeled as a YA thriller, and I read the query, so I know a bit about the story. And so my first thing when I started reading is that I came in with a ton of questions reading the opening, so I will read this opening to you. Living on the streets was tough, but after a while it became home. Every day was a battle, a game of chess that Dmitry Romanov had played long enough to become an expert. From pickpocketing the throngs of tourists that invaded like swarms of mosquitoes every summer to sleeping in back alleys and shady motels, Dmitry had done it all. So this is comped to Carry On and Elite, the Netflix show. It's a boarding school book, and I know it's a boarding school book. And first of all, when I see the name Dmitry Romanov, I think of the Romanov dynasty. I can't help it. It's exactly what happens to me. And it's almost a larger than life name. It maybe that's the intention, but especially with the Carry On comp, my first thought is, wait, how grounded is this story? Is it actually a fantastical story? Because even the writing, it's not literally historical, but between the name and the writing, especially that it's in third person, I'm immediately thinking, is this is this really a grounded contemporary thriller? And I assume from the comps it's not. But that was like the first thing I thought, like a little jarring with the opening, that it wasn't what I expected, I think is the thing. And then coming to the second paragraph, it was all about survival. Dimitri told himself no one was looking out for a 17-year-old homeless orphan, nobody but him, and he liked it that way. And so my sense here, knowing the context I know about what this story is supposed to be and the style of it, my main note, honestly, is that I think this is starting in the wrong place. I think it's the wrong choice to start for the viewer. I know this again from the query. I got the context from the query. The character is going to be arrested and falsely accused of a series of murders. And it's this like shady government type thing. He's sent to a boarding school. I think they're like trained up to be assassins or something at the boarding school. And he meets the son of a mafioso. And that's really where the story kicks off, because there's a murder and it's similar to the ones that Dimitri was accused of committing. I think it's the wrong choice to start before he's arrested. I really think you should start at boarding school. So it's probably because obviously you get the character to boarding school. I think it's a matter of just chopping off all those early chapters and instead finding creative and thoughtful ways to work in the necessary backstory about him being a homeless youth, being from Chicago, being arrested. You could have a little brief flashback scene using the writing that you've done. But I think any reader with the premise, you have to drop them into boarding school as soon as humanly possible is my advice. Because that's where I was like, oh, boarding school, get me to boarding school. But my other note in conjunction with the other one is I don't think this is a YA thriller. I don't think it should be labeled as a YA thriller. And it's just the nuance of labels, because in the current market, YA thriller means grounded, contemporary, and your comps are not grounded or contemporary, meaning Carry On is fantasy. It's like set in another world. It's Harry Potter-ish. And Elite is a high octane soap. So you could call it YA thriller if it was way closer to Elite, but the vibe I get, especially in third person, is that this is, I don't know what you should call it. I don't have a great suggestion, but when I see YA thriller, I think grounded contemporary, and it doesn't read that way to me, which isn't a bad thing. It just means that to find the right reader, you're going to want to adjust your label. You could even just say a YA novel, honestly. So here was an interesting example. I'm going to read the sentence. But when he woke up with chattering teeth and frozen bones, he'd figure it wouldn't hurt to get into a shelter for the week before they started to fill up. Just the grammar was wonky, and I think this is supposed to be he figured. I wasn't positive, though. Just a little note there. Okay, so this is another great example of combining disparate physical ideas that I think are stronger broken up. The line is, a shudder ran through him at a blast of frozen air. The wind tousled his too long, sandy blonde hair, and then it goes into, he pulled his hoodie closer to him, thumbing the frayed fabric that grazed his fingertips. It was worn and at least 2 sizes too big for him, but comfortable. The strong idea in this paragraph, the dominant idea, is it is really cold. He's freezing. The air is blasting through him, and he has this hoodie that's too big for him. That's a great character detail. That tells the reader more about, oh, he's living rough, etc., than having to actually say that. It's too big for him, but he pulls it in to keep himself warm. You don't need, I believe, the wind tousled his too long, sandy blonde hair. It's a little bit too close to trying to tell the reader what the character looks like a little awkwardly. Plus, you can't tell me blast and then give me tousled. Those are conflicting ideas. So definitely think about the verbs. But specifically, I think you should focus. I think the hoodie and the freezing and the walking is the strongest image in this paragraph. And even though I am suggesting it's starting in the right place, I still worked through and did all the notes here to help the writer and help everyone else, just so everyone knows, even though I am suggesting starting in a different place. Okay, so this is a weird case. I've given the advice that you can use contractions. It's okay. It actually makes your writing flow better. This is a weird case where it really tripped me up. The sentence is, it had been a while since Dimitri was last here, probably since last winter, just as spring thawed the frozen streets. This is a rare example where I just think it's better if you write it out. It had been a while. I think it's just going to be, your eye's going to flow over it better. Yeah, I think that's an example of like you might say it out loud, but when you write it, it's a rare one where it's a little bit better, in my opinion. So this was this is a run-on. The original is the walls were still a vibrant red, comma, various pieces of artwork adorned them, comma, trying to make this place feel less empty and more like a home. There are actually multiple ways to rewrite this so that it's 2 complete sentences. One way would be the walls were still a vibrant red, period, and then various artwork pieces adorned them, comma, trying to make the place feel less empty and more like a home. Or you can do the walls were still a vibrant red, comma, various pieces of artwork adorning them, period. And then you'd have to rewrite the next sentence to be its own sentence because it's not with that gerund. I mean, unless that's intentional, but I wouldn't. And generally my note, we're going to see a couple of more of them. There are a couple of run-ons / comma splices where it needs to either be a semicolon or you need to do multiple sentences and break them up. And this was just like a tiny little suggestion I had to add a little bit of context to the end of it. Dimitri didn't think it mattered. He just used it as a place to rest his head. Originally, that was the end of the sentence. And my suggestion is when it was cold, because it's context the reader kind of already has, but might as well reinforce it. Okay, so here, shuddered was used on the last page. So it's a case where it's such a specific verb that I wouldn't reuse it. I also think it's a little bit, I call it a big reaction to shudder at the sight of a common room with kids in it. I think that's a little melodramatic. I might not be that over the top. Think about grounding your reader in your main character, especially in third person. Very, very important in third person to help them feel like grounded and close to the character. And then I just highlighted this as an example, not necessarily literally here, but where it's kind of top line. I'll read it. Dimitri nearly shuddered at the sight of the loud common room filled with kids of all ages, most huddled in front of the big TV watching whatever game was playing. This is an example, not literally here because you don't want to drag out an opening, but where it's very top line, but there's so many opportunities for detail and specificity in a description like this. How old are the kids? What's the context there? Does Dimitri have any relationships with any of them? Youth home, they have a big TV. Is it flat screen? Was it donated? What game are they watching? What sport? Just always look for opportunities. I'd be careful, of course. You don't always want to essentially dramatize. This is narrate versus dramatize. But I thought that would potentially be an opportunity where I would probably be more descriptive to set a scene. Just some grammar stuff. Gerund is going to make that better / more correct. This is just a good example where being straight and direct is just stronger. His stomach rumbled. That's all you have to say. We know he's hungry, especially because it's mentioned before. And the next sentence, which is good, is the meager breakfast he had that day now worn down to fumes. In fact, that should be a lowercase t. His stomach rumbled. The meager breakfast he had that day now worn down to fumes. That's a lot stronger. You don't need protesting his empty stomach. Okay, so this line, he meets a character and it starts, well, 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 a robust voice said from behind him. Dimitri grinned and turned around. I don't know what a robust voice is. That description is slightly off. And I wouldn't describe a voice that way. And then Dimitri grinned and turned around. You don't need that. It's kind of a play-by-play thing that I don't think contributes to the scene. Let's see. I'll read the rest of the paragraph. I was wondering when I'd see your mug around here, and sure enough, here you are. Earl was one of the guys that ran the place. He'd been here since forever, Dimitri figured, or at least since Dimitri had been coming and going. He was a gentle giant, huge, with an enormous belly and thick beard, trustworthy. This leaning on telling details, specifically the trustworthy, it would be better to show or demonstrate these interactions or the character's feelings. And actually, I want to contrast that. There is an example down here. Here, just going to read it. He was starving. I could eat, said Dimitri. Earl laughed, and then I made a small edit. The sound large and proud, like he wasn't afraid to take up space. I love that description a lot. This is a fantastic example of I don't know what a robust voice is, but I know what this is. I know what a big, hearty laugh is, and it tells me so much about this character. I love that description. That does more work than anything else. Think about like doing that instead of everything else, essentially. But I did also label here, it's a series of dialogue back and forth. Hey, how are you? A handshake. I don't think you need the play-by-play of the handshake when you can just say that they fist bumped or whatever. And then there's good to see you, Dimitri. Dimitri gave a small smile. Yeah, you too. Hungry, asked Earls. This is small talk, essentially, back and forth, that you just don't need in a scene. You want to cut this as often as possible, especially when the reader already knows the character is hungry. You don't need to repeat it through dialogue. So just always bear that in mind. Here's another example where a little gerund fix and a semicolon, or a gerund fix, a full stop, and then a separate sentence is going to solve a run-on problem. This was a little one where it said Earl added extra, and then it says Dimitri knew how big the portion sizes should have been. I'm not sure you need that because extra kind of already does that work, and then extra is an echo here, so I would rejig to kind of simplify and not repeat the ideas. When Earl finished, he handed him a plate. I don't think you need that. Just a little thing, a mix of vegetables. Maybe it's because I love vegetables. Just an opportunity to be specific. Dimitri had never felt his mouth water more. It's just a bit of filtering. I think it'd just be a tick stronger without it, but it's also not a deal breaker at all. So, because I read on, again, I think this is back and forth conversation that I'm not sure is meaty and really contributing to character development, world building. Just like be very mindful of kind of these sorts of conversations. And like, does Earl show up again in the book would be my question. And honestly, if he's not important, you don't need him. Or even starting later, you can always mention him if he does show up. And then I just wanted to scroll quickly. The next section is a dream, and it reads, he dreamt of a woman, hair the color of warm honey, eyes so blue and deep Dimitri thought it was an ocean. She was everywhere all at once, and there's a dream, and it turns into a nightmare, and he wakes up, and then he's arrested. And I didn't want to like go through and do all the line edits there, but I wanted to like mention, because I already think it should start at boarding school, but also starting with a dream, like a character having a dream / nightmare and waking up, is really frowned upon as an opening. A lot of agents don't like it, and I would be very, very wary of using that plot device. So that's just like kind of my final little note. Just kind of being aware. Of course, sometimes you can get away with it, but it's just good to know that a lot of agents just don't kind of like that device in a story. So yeah, like I just really wanted the boarding school. It's such a good concept. And also the chapter headings did have character names, so I'm wondering if it's dual POV. If at all possible, it'd be great to get 2 POVs into your sample, but I know that's not always possible. All right, sorry, scrolling back, trying to catch you guys. Good note. Also, with the whole boarding school thing, just thriller in general. I know I said it doesn't feel like a normal YA thriller. It's still a thriller because it has thriller elements and a suspense mystery thread. Generally, you want to cut to your hook as soon as possible in a thriller. That's just kind of like a thriller rule, because the readers are a little less patient. Maybe it's just me. You want to get to the promise of the premise, essentially, as soon as possible. So. Sorry, I really, really hate the dead air. This is a good note from Simone, where it says, shudder to the sight of the loud common room. You're absolutely right. It's conflicting sensory ideas. And if you're going for the noise, this would be an opportunity to lean into, is it the tinny sound from the crappy TV of the crowd cheering that like hurts your ears. Like specificity. Is it this one kid, Ralph, I don't know, who shrieks like a banshee? Like think about the specificity, and yes, definitely making sure that if your senses match up, your sensory details. The next one's adult, because I know I've just done a bunch of YA, so. I love that y'all are having a conversation. Well, you guys are very nice to me. Thank you. I still kind of want to get someone to do these with me, and they'll just talk while I scroll comments. And actually, I did actually consider that for this one, but I decided for the first one to try it by myself to see how it went before I pulled another person into it. But it did occur to me that it could be very useful to you to have a second person looking at things, because it's always going to be subjective, and it's the things that stick out to me. But yeah. Okay, I'm just going to jump into the next one. I know there's stuff going on in the comments discussion, and I can't kind of dig into it at the time, like right now, but I ask you all to be like as respectful as possible. I can't even like mod from here. I guess I can put people in timeouts, but if there's something kind of specific going on, please let me know. It's hard for me to kind of go back far enough because they stopped showing me comments at a certain point, so I can't track whatever conversation is going on, and I hope everything is okay. So give you guys a second to catch up. Okay, I'm going to go into the next screen sharing thing, and yeah. Another reason I might want to have a person with me, it would help me with modding. Okay, so this next one is an adult domestic thriller by Becca Day. It's called Save Me. Becca has a YouTube channel, and I will actually, any of these that have YouTube channels, I think this is the first one of the ones. There's a few. I'm going to drop that in like a comment or in the description box. So this one is an adult thriller. All right, I'm just going to dive right in. I will read the beginning for you. And I have like I did minor line edits, so I'll read it with the line edits to this opening paragraph. The sirens had seemed louder than usual, perhaps because, unlike nearby cities, the sleepy streets of Kensington Grove very rarely saw any such commotion. It's actually a great example of one of the more long-winded, that's in quotes because it's not actually long-winded, a stylistic opening that has these kinds of phrases that run into each other. It's very British, and it works for a domestic thriller quite well. And then I just have this note. It is a nitpick. I say it's a nitpick. I'm just really weird about past perfect, but I know it's super a thing in British writing, and so don't listen to me. I just wanted to note that it did ping me a tiny bit, but it's whatever. Now, the wailing sirens had been replaced with the hushed murmurs of the residents crowding behind the yellow tape. Great image. For a town that rarely experienced much excitement beyond the annual duck race, 2 unexpected deaths in the space of 3 months was to the local gossipers like mother's milk to a baby. Sure, they expressed the appropriate amount of concern. Some even wiped a tragic tear from their cheek while whispering something about how it was awful, just awful. A note here in U.S. grammar, we wouldn't put a comma here, but again, Americans versus Brits. But everyone knew that the main reason they were stood out in their slippers and dressing gowns was to find out all the juicy details, perhaps even sneak a peek. The reason this grabbed me is the voice in this opening paragraph. I know exactly where this is set. I know exactly the kind of people these are. I know exactly the kind of domestic thriller this is. Very British. Really, I think, strong opening that sets a scene. It's I said here, it's a very specific kind of British book. Yes. And it does it well. So moving here to our main character, because it is in third person. So great third person example. Jodi Anderson stood at the back of the crowd, hugging her cardigan, love that, around her to ward off the morning chill. She was not interested in getting a peek, and because peek was used on the previous line, I just suggested maybe subbing out a different phrase here. At the dead body in the garden. Instead, her eyes were trained on the grim-faced police officers, attempting in vain to read their lips as they muttered to one another. She had a vague idea of what the current storyline was, thanks to the game of Chinese Whispers. That's Chinese Whispers circling the group. I need to delete that. Track changes isn't on. That's not helpful. But someone had stabbed Nora Williams to death in her back garden, and little Lacey Williams was missing, most likely kidnapped by her mother. So I have a note here for Chinese Whispers. This is going to ping with an American audience as like, no. This is a very British phrase. I know it's used in England. I know it's okay in England, but FYI, 100% if you're published here, they are going to change this to Game of Telephone. It does have racist origins, and I would personally not use Chinese Whispers. I did double check it on Google. I was like, I'm pretty sure this doesn't have great origins. And indeed, but just a British versus American thing. We're not going to know what this means. So it's Game of Telephone for us. So, but I know it's totally okay in the UK. And if you're querying in the UK, that's fine. Oh yeah, this is just a little note. The reason I changed it to circling instead of had circled, taking out the past perfect, was to make it a little bit more immediate. Most of my like little edits are about immediacy in this opening. So here I have a question of Lacey, who's the girl's daughter, about how she had messaged her just the night prior. My note, just like curiosity, was, what is this text messaging? Is this messaging over Facebook? I might add a context here also because that would potentially give the reader context about Lacey's age. I will say when I hear a little Lacey Williams, I think she's a child, but I don't think of a child as messaging another neighbor. So that did just kind of ping for me. So I want to read the end of this paragraph because it ties into my next note, my overarching note. Already she could feel the side eyes of her neighbors. Funny how your actions follow you around. Something you do that seems insignificant at the time comes back to haunt you months later. I love that foreshadowing. She wondered as she stood there watching the forensics team place little cones along the sweeping driveway. Oh, is that supposed to be driveway instead of driveway? Yeah. Leading to the Williams house. If she would have done things differently, had she known how it would all turn out, would she have even moved to Kensington Grove at all? Hindsight is a bitch. So my note here, it goes on. It has a scene at a community center with lots of different neighbor characters. I honestly think you should cut all of it. Not because it's bad, but because this. Hindsight is a bitch. And in fact, you could do that on its own line. That is the end of a prologue or a first chapter. That is a punch in the face before you jump to the past. You jump to 3 months ago or however long it is. That's where I wanted to leave off. I actually might make this a prologue. Sometimes you can do a prologue, and this is a great example of when it might work. So what that would mean, and I'm going to scroll down. So this is how chapter 1 continued previously. I just skipped past it all the way to chapter 2. You could make this chapter 1. And then it jumps you. It's 1 year. So it's 1 year earlier. First of all, I wouldn't say almost exactly 1 year earlier. My note here is if you have too much hindsight baked into it, of present Jodi reflecting on the past, it saps a lot of tension out of the book. It's actually something that was done in Home Before Dark, Riley Sager's book, but I think intentionally. In the chapters written by Maggie's dad, he's not, at least I assumed it was that he wasn't meant to be the best writer, that his book is Pulp Fiction. And that fake book does this all the time. If only I had known then what I know now. And if you do that too much, it is frustrating and it saps your work of tension. So my line edits here are all about grounding it in present, like making the third feel close and present so that from that prologue on, or you can still call it chapter 1 or chapter 2, but I think prologue would work. And this is chapter 1. The reader is in a year earlier and they're moving forward to all the things that happen. And they get that tease in the beginning. It does its job. and then you want to thoroughly ground. So I was changing a ton of past perfect here. I changed the opening here to, as Jody passed through the gates of Kensington Grove, she wasn't entirely sure what to expect, instead of almost exactly 1 year earlier, when Jody had first passed the gates of Kensington Grove, she hadn't been entirely sure of what to expect. It's just so much more active and present when you change it up. But here you can still have it. She had heard of gated communities before, the estate and Hull, just a few. That is fine. So that's what my entire note here is, all that same thing. So here is a description of the estate. And I have a note here to delete this. I'll read the few lines before it, and then I'll read it. Along the edge of the main road ran a stream leading to the huge pond which took pride of place at the center of the estate, and it was along this stream that the annual duck race was held. The stream was the only natural thing in the entire community. I love that observation. It ran out under the gate on the east side into the surrounding meadows. So this next bit that I'm suggesting you delete would be, again, kind of pulling the reader out of the present. Jody often watched the water flowing under the wrought iron bars, how it shimmied around them without a care in the world, as if it were mocking the very prospect of using gates to keep people out. This is gonna like pull the reader out again. I would keep things present so that it goes from into the surrounding meadows. The rest of Kensington Grove had been designed, and you're moving forward and kind of that descriptive ideas. And again, I changed past perfect to present. I'm so bad at grammar. I'm probably saying everything wrong. It's fine. Okay, so if you take my advice, that's why I'm cutting this, because this is, the readers won't know who these characters are if you cut that second scene, which I really think you should do. I just think it'll make the sample stronger. The community center sat self-importantly on the man-made hill behind the duck pond, and around it stood the largest houses, the ones that Heidi Downhurst and Julie Parsons lived in. You can work in those details elsewhere, but it's as Jody discovers them, instead of having that hindsight in there. Same thing with the next line, if you take that suggestion. Jody's rented house was not near the community center. Cut that. It would be, Jody's rented house was one of the smaller houses on the far end of the estate. And then, because you jump here to, here is your handbook, the red-faced man who had been waiting outside to greet her said, plonking a heavy wad of paper, spiral bound and laminated, into her hands. This man was Paul Downhurst, the development manager for Kensington Grove. So like all of this works as like, you're in the present, you're like, maybe add a detail to indicate that she's driving through or what have you. And then you come here to, she's at her house. Though it does say, though it wouldn't take Jody long to learn that while he led, he led on the structural development of the state, I would say was a leader. I don't know. It was his wife who was in charge of how things ran. I think this tiniest amount of peek forward is okay. It's about being very careful about how you use it. Little teases are okay here and there. And then I just made like a little comma thing here, adding a comma before the dialogue. As you can tell, not heavy notes. My main thing with this sample, I was intrigued, pulled in. It's just about restructuring slightly, like cut it off at hindsight is a bitch, go right into chapter 1 and make sure that you're not winking from the future into the past too much. You basically want the reader to read that opening, get super intrigued. You shoot them back to the past. And from that point, they're so fully immersed in the past story. They don't forget the prologue, but they push things to the back of their mind, and you kind of ramp up that tension all over again. So that's how I would do it. Stop screen sharing and come back to you guys. Do I need to, hold on. I'm taking a moment to, oh, Lordy though. Hold on. I'm putting you in a timeout. I know I missed a lot. I apologize to everyone, but that is inappropriate in here, and I need a moderator. Discussion is okay. Going after people is not, and I'm just not able because I can't see the screen to properly moderate your discussion. So I don't want anyone to feel kind of uncomfortable. So yeah, check out Becca's channel. She's in the comments. I really liked that sample. It's such a specific kind of British domestic thriller that I just eat up. I love all these stuffy British people who aren't, because they love gossip, like getting involved in people's problems. It's just such a mood. I love all those shows too. There's certain shows and they end up on Netflix. Like I like watching all of them. Yeah, I guess it's time for me to get moderators. How exciting is that? I might have to like bribe Lainey into modding my chats. Or if anyone would like to volunteer. I feel like Simone might be good at that if Simone's into it. So, okay. I think I've done 4 or 5 of these, which means we're like past the halfway point, I think. Trying to move through these as quickly as I can, and I hope the additional reading is helping. And I know because I watched your videos, Becca, that you're still writing this book. Keep writing. It's great. Like, submit to AMM when it's done. So, all right. I am going to do another one. Let me just check your... Becca, I can actually suggest someone that maybe you should exchange with, who I know of, so I might email you. I've been unofficially mentoring someone. Anyway, it's a whole thing. We're going to screen share again, and we're going to dive into the next one. We're at 1 hour and 40 minutes, guys. This is bonkers. And it's only like 9. All right. Next is... I mean, you know I looked at YA thrillers. I'm sorry. My tastes. This is When All Is Lost, a YA thriller by Riley K. Jones, who is in the chat and also has a channel. It's another one that I'm going to link to. So, chapter 1. Darcy Zara Mackenzie finds things. I really like that opening line. That was what everyone, and it said, would whisper behind my back. And I did suggest the change to everyone whispered. It's going to feel a little more present behind my back. And then I did a little snip here. And the only rumor I could confirm it was true. This is a great tease because it means there are other rumors. There are other things that people say about her. And you're already setting up your character as an outsider, which is good. And my suggestion... take it as you will, would be to add examples of what some of those other things are. I guess it's that bullet pointed list example again, but it's a little punchy and you can like kind of ground the context a bit, but throw some of those examples out of the things they say about her that are not true. And then I just put in like a little transition. Those are just examples. And like, you don't have to do what I do, like your own voice. I did a transition. It was all bullshit, except I was a finder. And you're coming back to your main point, which leads into your first scene. If you lost something, I'd find it for you. If information you didn't want out there made itself known, I'd have it erased. If you needed dirt on someone, I'd dig it up for you. I had a natural talent, a natural bound curiosity for finding things. Of course, it all came at a price. Again, this is a good little teaser of stakes. So here, this jumps you right into your scene, and it starts with the growls and barks echoed across the chilly night. And I read further, and I did pop up here, and I kind of want a additional transition here to ground the reader in what's happening. That's why it was my suggestion to maybe do something like tonight. I was trying to find X, like it's just a thought. And then I also have a thought about the dogs that I'll mention down below. Being oblique is good, but you might want to be more direct, but I'll talk about it in a minute. Here is, be careful with constructions that add a little bit of distance and pull back from the immediacy. This is really critical in a thriller specifically. So it's why it's a common note that you're seeing across these. Use first person past whenever possible in a thriller. So I changed it. Wasn't that I was against high heels. I changed it to I'm not against high heels. It's like keeps the reader kind of more in the present moment. I made a small suggestion here to just basically reverse the text here. The original was with each drum of my soul into the lawn, my pulse beat in my ear, and I would make it my pulse beat in my ear with each drum of my soul into the lawn. I just liked the rhythm of that. Okay, so this next one is with each shaky breath, the cool night air burned in my lungs. I like that physical image. Not literally an image, but you know what I mean. With each step I took, I neared the next set of chain-linked fences, the soft glow of the parking lot illuminating them. I get it, but I personally might do it active was basically my suggestion. I'm feeling a tad bit of distance in this with the repetition of with each. That's just a personal style thing where I might make it a little more active, especially because here, your next thing is active. I latched on, wire shaking against my force, and scurried to the top. That I'm in there. I'm right in there. It's very grabby and compelling. As my hands clawed to the top, a stronger wave of vibrations rattled the wire. My gaze snapped down to see their vicious bare teeth gleaming up at me, snapping to catch me, but I was higher. I was free. Okay, so this is where I went back up and I was like, wait, where I think it might be better to just say that their dog's chasing her. And you get to it here finally in the next paragraph, but I definitely got to this there and had to scroll and go like, what? And connect it here with the growls and barks echoed across the chilly night. Essentially between that statement and this one, which is a stronger wave of vibrations rattled the wire. It's a little passive because we don't know who's doing it. It's the dogs. It might be better served being a bit more straightforward, but that's kind of personal, just like a personal thought. So here, I love this explanation and introduction to the dogs. Cutting through Joseph Castellani's property was the fastest way to get to the high school on foot, but it also had two disadvantages: Bruno and Bruiser. That might work moved up before the growls and barks echoed across the chilly night. I'd say it's okay to actually like be a little more straightforward of where she is and what she's doing. Just a thought. And then now at eye level, I watched the beefy Rottweilers try to nip at me from behind the chain, and I clapped the dirt off my hands. I like that kind of directness. It's like, oh, beefy Rottweilers. I love the image I'm getting here, so I would front load that as much as possible. And then this next one is my heart fluttered in my chest as a smile I couldn't suppress crawled its way over my lips. And I noticed that this leans a bit close to telling. I don't dislike it, but there's something where I'm like, do you need it? Because I'm just not 100% sold on kind of that, but I love this line by itself. Good breaking up of paragraphs. I never felt more alive. Oh, so here I just got a little confused. It says, as I left the snarling dogs, Joseph Castellani's voice cut through the night air, calling the dogs back to himself. I'm just wondering if it's important, because for like a microsecond I was like, wait, is she about to have a confrontation with this kid? And it seems like not. So I'm wondering if it feels like a detail I don't necessarily need. Because you want to get here. I love this strong active image. I stuffed my chilled hands into the large pocket of my bombshell jacket, the damp cold ripping through my skinny jeans. And then it has, and faced the overcrowded parking lot jam with minivans and four-door sedans, and you're about to see in my edit, I suggest moving that just to have it be that strong image of her stuffing her hands into the pockets. Also the bombshell jacket, I'm picturing her style, especially with the boots you already mentioned, forming a picture, thumbs up. Here, I just have a little edit here to make this image more clear and kind of go in order. My suggestion is I slunk across the overcrowded parking lot jammed with minivans and four-door sedans hanging close to the shadows. Because you have the ideas broken up, I would put them together. So she's slinked down, she's slinking, and it's overcrowded and there are minivans, and so you get like a forward mental picture. So this paragraph closes with, for one, it was doubtful I could even get a parking spot tonight, and two, it drew less attention to myself. No one would know that I was here. And this is the point in the sample where I started wondering, why is she here? What is she doing? Which is why I went up to make that suggestion. If there could be a tiny bit of context of maybe what she was trying to find. Because I know because I continued reading that you don't know for 3 or 4 or 5 pages. So just might tease that a bit. So here, cheers and applause of the championship football game exploded into the air while the marching band's tunes drowned out the rest. I stopped at the edge of the curb, watching the small figures in scarlet rush across the field, drinking in the applause. It's an echo. I would cut one of these or rewrite it slightly, because it definitely pinged that there's a repeat of applause. And I also don't know how important it is to mention that they're drinking in the applause. I don't know if you need that. So then you have a transition, which is, but I didn't head toward the glow of the football stadium, and I'm just not sure you need it. For the tension building, I think it's stronger if you just go, there was once a time I would have been in the stands with my friends. Like, I just don't think you need that transition. Here, I just did a little rewrite again for... It felt a tiny bit blow by blow, and I tried to insert a little bit of sentence variation. I'm not saying I nailed it, but this is just a sample. The original was, I headed toward the shadowy corner of the building, slipped behind the overgrown bushes, and faced the ground level windows. There was always a window on the south side that never locked properly. I pulled on the metal latch and it creaked up. Then I slipped inside the women's restroom, my combat boots slamming against the tile floor. And my just suggestion, take it as you will, cut things that the reader doesn't necessarily need to know. There was always a window on the south side that never locked properly. Slipping through the shadows and behind an overgrown hedge, I tried the metal latch. Bingo. Then I slipped inside the women's restroom, my combat boots slamming against the tiled floor as I landed. Just a thought, a suggestion I put of adding a little sentence variation, just kind of pulling back on the play-by-play. I speak as someone who writes play-by-play as well. I fix all these things in editing. So here we have a description of a person. A rusty-colored stall, that should be stall door, creaked open, and a small figure walked out. "You're late," came her gruff voice. Her narrow hazel eyes gleamed against her caramel skin. I had 2 questions here. Why are they narrow? I couldn't tell if this was she's narrowing her eyes, which would be a different description, or you would say it differently, or if it's an attempt to describe the shape of her eyes, and you have to be very, very careful here. And then caramel skin, the current rule of thumb, and it does change, but it's what I, at least recently, heard from the prevailing wisdom of writers of color, specifically in the YA space, is not to use food to describe skin color. It's going to vary person to person, but I just would not say caramel skin, personally. You just have to be a little bit careful there. Yeah. And I kind of stopped there. Cause yeah, it's a good sample with kind of and it's just kind of like looking at adding a little intrigue, adding a little tease, adding a little forward action, and then carrying forward. So yeah. And I know you're in the chat, so you might actually have answers to some of these questions. Let's see. Hold on. Oh, here, I'll just... Yes, you need a completed manuscript for author mentor match. Also best if you get at least 1 critique partner or pass on it, but we know that people submit first drafts. We know. It's fine. But I mean, it's always good to polish if you can. Here's Lainey. Yay. Yes, Lainey's an AMM mentee. Right. Sorry, scrolling. Yeah, it's the current prevailing wisdom, and I like to listen to what people are saying. I'm just kind of like, okay. I mean, I hardly have a perfect solution, but in my recent book, I kind of like did some reading, and I'm straightforward whenever possible. I just say if a character is Black, I say that they're Black, and so on. Admittedly, though, I have often used the cheat of a character having a name that clearly denotes that they are Filipino or South Asian or whatnot, but that can in some ways be a cheat. But yeah. There you go. She's narrowing her eyes. Yeah, so just you have to write a little different because I like narrowing eyes, and in case she's a little cynical, I like it. Sorry, I'm just reading through. Here, just a suggestion. For her hazel eyes narrowed. I mean, I would say if she's a person of color, if she's Latinx, for example, you can say that or find ways to say it. You can also say medium brown skin, light brown skin. It's fine. But everyone like kind of has different preferences for how to do it. Yeah. Submissions are going to open in January, around January 15th. I have to double check my calendar, but that's the goal. Mentors will be announced in November and their profiles will be up in December. So this year I'm actually on top of things. So that's great. All right. So I'm going to jump into another one. I can't believe 279 of you are still watching. It's been 2 hours almost. Oh my gosh. All right. Next is, I went hard on YA. I'm sorry. I'll try to do more adults in the next one. Casey Murphy, An Offering of Blood and Stone, which is a YA fantasy. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons I pulled this one out is it's third person, which I know the other one was third person too. It is less common. So I just thought this was an interesting opening. So I'm going to read the first paragraph or the first bit of it. There's always one, a person who is too ugly or pretty, too rich or poor, too manly or girlish, too wise or stupid. It doesn't really matter what they are. It doesn't even matter who they are. What matters is that they are different. In Weir, it was Gregor. He was well liked once. I'd even heard he was handsome with his bright green eyes and copper skin. But his wife died and his daughter married a man from a village beyond the Green Shield. And then Gregor was different in the worst sort of way. He was too alone. He tended his crops like the rest of us. He always had a sweet for me. So this is where I inserted kind of my first note. I actually read a tiny bit further. I read to, instead he dotted around at all hours, squeaking at shadows and squawking nonsense until one day he squeaked and squawked himself right into a hangman's noose. This is the first time I stopped and came back to he always had a sweet for me. And my question was, this is YA. How old is she? How old is she making these recollections? How old was she when he hanged? And that's going to come up again here. This feels very present. It's kind of the opposite of what I said in some of those other ones. This could, I wouldn't say you have to use past perfect, but I want something that is going to ground me in how old she was when this happened. As I kept reading, it became clear this had to be deeper childhood. And kept reading here. My life would have been so different if we'd never attended his hanging. So I had a note here that personally, I don't love over-reliance on this kind of wink. But sometimes it works. I'm not saying cut it, especially because I think my big thing here is, again, this is another point. I'm going to read forward. So we went, Mama, Papa, and me, standing in the freezing mud 2 days past Imblock. Gregor was past most knowing by then. He was gabbing on all the way up to the gibbet, speaking to faces no one else could see, except me. I watched, wide-eyed, as a splinter-edged face in the woods watched with eyes that glowed, tiny beads of sap running down like tears. I gripped my mama's skirts then, shaking and sobbing, and she knew. And I stopped again here where I'm like, how old is she in this scene? And it's becoming clear this is a deeper flashback. You have to be very, very careful opening a YA narrative like this. You can do it in adult in a way that it's harder in YA. Because in YA, the reader wants to get to the main character as quickly as possible. They want to know who they are. With this, it's a matter of just a little bit of contextual, like making it clear that when he was hung, she was 8, however old she was, to make it more clear that she is now a teenager looking back on this. Because, like, you don't grip your mama's skirts when you're a teenager. So just, like, making it a little bit more clear. And then this is a sentence I called out. The single voice of the crowd asking for the saint's blessing. And that was all the 9 would protect us from the madness he brought to our doors. I was very confused by this sentence. I wasn't sure who the subject was, who it was about. I would look to this one for clarity. And then, so we get to the end. Mama knelt in the mud with me, pressing my face into her sensible wool shoulder, arms around me like iron. No one thought anything of it then, but I knew. I knew from the way her fingers clutched so hard I would bruise, and the cold promise she hissed in my ear. Not you, Anya, never you. From the time I was 7, I knew it wasn't a matter of if our neighbors would turn on me. It was a matter of when. This is a good opening. Actually, this really reads like a prologue, and this might be one of those cases where you are okay to have a prologue, by the way. But it's a little late to find out she was 7. You want to just get that grounding information a bit further up so that it's clear. So yeah, might do a prologue for that. So then I come here. I was 5 when I started seeing the faces around Weir, faces that no one else noticed. And I was immediately confused because a few seconds before she's 7, and then you're going back 2 more years. I'm not sure you want to do this. It feels like a second prologue, and it feels like a second dump of information that we don't need. I personally wouldn't have this. I would cut the whole thing. I think this is just so strong. This is similar to the thriller where it's like you end on, I knew it wasn't a matter of if our neighbors would turn on me, but when. That's so strong. You want them to take that idea into your forward action, which is here. The day the shadow came to Weir started like any other. It was just past my 17th name day and a saint's week besides. She's 17. This is the YA story. This is the present. So yeah, I would do that first part as a prologue, put a little bit of grounding information in it, and then get to this as soon as possible as a chapter 1. So yeah, I'm giving you permission to do a prologue, I guess. How daring. I should do a video on prologues. It's like, you know it when you see it. And in fact, my YA thriller, The Ivies, has a prologue, and it's because my editor suggested it. I was like, seriously, you're giving me permission for this? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to read this whole paragraph, actually. The bakery had been in the family for 30 years, passed from my gran to my mama. Wedged in town beneath the palisade, it was cramped and not nearly as fine as our neighbors, all uneven edges and rough corners. I loved it all the same. Every 10 years or so, gran and then mama had added a room, first a proper storefront, then a bedroom, then a second bedroom. Only the storefront bothered to glow with fresh wax and whitewash. The rest of our home was comfortable, but not fussed with impressing the neighbors. The boards groaned underfoot and the roof sighed in storms, but it was home. My note here is, I like all of this detail, but I'm really concerned about it dragging your pacing. Because when you bring us to the character, you want to not have too much of this, to be honest. Even though I like it, I'm concerned, especially because it goes into more. My favorite room was the bakery itself and so on. This is an entire paragraph of more of that, more kind of backstory. So I would take these 2 paragraphs and really pare it down. So because this is where you want it to get to. The air was warm and soft with yeast and butter. While the bread finished, I focused on my next project, the present you want to get here. I didn't flinch when the coals popped behind me. Thin lines of sunlight pried their way through the closed shutters. On the eve of spring, the night was cold in the greenwood. I was grateful for the fire, warming my hands and blade enough to cut dough into perfect tiny triangles with barely a whisper. What are you making? The voice slithered up and over my ears, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. So I say get here as fast as possible, but I was so confused about this dialogue tag, and I did read on a bit. So the next line is, I glanced back at the door to our shop, barely ajar. Mama's voice floated through. She always spoke to herself to go through the day's stock. 3 honey loaves to Marta, that's 20 today. We'll never keep pace. They're buying twice what we prepared. Have to put it on the... I couldn't hear what I'd have to put on instead of the honey loaves, though. Her footsteps danced away on creaking floorboards. In their place, the fire hissed again. Now I know... fantasy, magic. That is who spoke, but it is still really, really confusing. And at the least, this 3 honey loaves to Marta, should that be loaves? Should be... up next to the mama action tag. She always spoke to herself through the day stock. So it's really, really clear that this is mama. Don't have it on a separate line. But I'm just really on the fence about the voice slithered up and over my ears because I was so confused about what it was. I don't have an elegant or perfect solution to that. Maybe it's adding a tease that she knows who's speaking but wants to ignore it. Something that addresses that a reader might be confused, but the character knows what's going on. I don't know, but I was definitely confused when I read that. So yeah, that was the sample, and my note was it has a really lovely voice, a lovely third-person fantasy voice. It's pretty uncommon in YA fantasy, and my suggestion was to look at the Bone Houses as a comp. I think it would be a really, really strong comp for this book. I did note from the query that one of your comps is very, very old. It's classic, but I actually think it's a little too old to sell in modern YA, so do the Bone Houses instead. There's definitely a market for this kind of fantasy. It is a tougher market, but I think the writing's quite beautiful. It's just balancing. You can get away with more of the navel gazing and the backstory in an adult fantasy, and YA just doesn't quite handle that well. So, all right, I'm gonna stop sharing, come back to y'all. There's one more left. 2 hours. All right, how we doing? Oh yes, a video on prologues. I know I just like set myself up for failure. Prologues are it's so tough because it's like sometimes they're right and sometimes they're all wrong. And it's like porn, you know it when you see it. So, all right. You're talking about food descriptors still. Looks respectful. Thank you. And I know that those are tough conversations to have. I will get a mod for the next one. I want everyone to have good interactions in the chat, and I apologize if anyone was upset on either side. Just throw a little compliment to everyone. Yeah, I did definitely choose. I don't see the point in choosing to go over something that I don't like because I want everyone to feel good about themselves. All of these are samples where it's elevating. It's taking something that's already interesting and already doing something right and elevating it, but showing you all of these had common mistakes. That's going in quotes because some of it is subjective. And so many of these, like, I know not all of them are done. Some of them are works in progress, which was totally okay for this critique. But like, I picked out things to like show you what an agent might think. And so you can definitely bear all of these things in mind with querying. Your goal is basically you don't want them to stop reading anything that could trip them up. So all right. Okay. Yeah, and sorry everyone who missed submissions. I will do it again, though. I mean, I have 300. And I do want to get to more of the ones that were submitted in August. So this is probably going to end up being at best quarterly activity. It could be twice a year. And it also might be a case where I do queries instead, because at least I know queries are only one page and I can do more of them. It's really hard to do pages because, as I said, I don't think it helps to only do your first page, which means I have to do fewer samples, more pages each, but hopefully they contain things that are helpful to a lot of you because they're doing similar things that maybe you recognize in your own writing. I mean, I did self-owns in several of these of seeing things that I do that I have had to get better at. Okay, last one. And I will work on varying our categories better next time. The last one is a middle grade. So one of the reasons I picked this one is that, and she's in the chat, Allison, I think this is really interesting because I did read pitches on all of these. This has an interesting format. It is told in the format of journal entries, and it has two girls writing and drawing in the margins. And so some of these are just formatting ideas. But I do have questions for this one. And as I noted with the British market, I have some gaps in my knowledge of what really works in the middle grade market. And ultimately, I'm going to have questions and you will know it better than I do. And so the author knows that she had one format originally and then changed it and sent me the new format. And thumbs up. I like the new format. I think this is going to be more clear and easy to work through. So that was my first note. I'm glad you updated the format. This is Wunder Cemetary it's probably not German. It's Wunder Cemetary, an MG spooky mystery by Alison Carvalho. Okay, so my first thought genuinely when I read this was, why is it 2006? Put a pin in that. That's going to come up again. That was my literal first thought. So my literal second thought, the first line is, Gran said that writing in a book like this is how you find the truth. This was the first journal I had ever had. I never thought I would own a journal. I didn't like to write much. My second thought is, who is this? I'm grasping for context is what I said, in the sense that if all you have is your format, if it's legit only going to be the journal and the margin notes, you might need to come up with a device, and it might be margin notes, to give the reader the context. Why is there essentially a prologue in the journal? Why is it 4 years later? Why is it 2006 is kind of a separate question. And who is this? Who's speaking? And this actually brings me to the second thing. The first margin note is an arrow that points to "and some lies," which is underlined, and blue ink is obviously. My thing here, they're probably not going to be able to print different colors. They can do different handwriting fonts, though. That is a design thing that they can do. And my thought, I have two different thoughts for how to do these margin notes for an agent or an editor to read. Either make them red, like all margin notes are bright red, so they really stand out between the journal writing and not, or I really am not sure. Go all out with color coding. Margin notes have one color, Ophelia's notes have another color, and Caroline's notes have another color. And you need to, at the very beginning, that would be here, tell the agent, editor, etc., what the color coding means so that they can more easily follow. And then the colors won't be in the final copy. I would put a note that it should be different handwriting fonts, because I just don't think you normally get a full color interior. And I know that so the Ivies had some special formatting, and they were able to do different handwriting on a couple things. So, okay. So I will say mostly, I really liked the voice in the journal writing, the like actual writing of the journal. It definitely, though I have questions about age, it feels, I don't read a lot of middle grade, but it feels appropriate. It's interesting. I liked reading about it. So again, I had the second question here. I hope if you are reading it, you are someone that is supposed to be reading it. You know who you are. And if you are Renee, you put this book back right now where you found it. My question here was why is, it's the same question. Why is there the prologue? Why is this kid, who I assume is a little older now, lampshading it? Like, why would she expect someone to read her private journal? Questions that I have, that I think an agent would have as well. So chapter 1. So my third question, why is it set in 2002? If you have a very good reason for this, it's got to go in the query. That's my advice. You need to lay it up for the agent why this is a near historical middle grade. And I'm not super familiar with the middle grade market, not as familiar as with others. I know near historical really doesn't work in YA. I honestly imagine it's the same in middle grade, because literally to a middle grade reader, 2002 is ancient history. It's literally when I graduated from high school, but like they think it's ancient history, because think about it. Your readers were born in the 2010s. And it's just, I'm just really wondering why it's set in 2002. And there might be a very, very good reason. Tell the agent so they know. Okay, so here, your opening of the journal proper is, "Hello, Joe. Gran gave you to me before she died. I'm going to call you Joe." I think that's very cute. "I'm going to try to write new every day. I'm going to remember everything just like Gran told me. She said writing is a way to honor memories. She could be weird. She used to make me laugh so much." Again, I feel like the voice is very spot on. But here, I really think you should be lampshading your main character. And I actually think it's such a kid thing. I remember my old diaries. I would write, "My name is," I'm not going to say my name because of my echo, but you know what my name is. I would write, "I am 8 years old." I would write that stuff to my little journal. And I feel like you can get away with that. Literally have Ophelia introduce herself to her journal so that the reader is introduced to who she is. And it just gives that little context, especially how old she is. Because as I read on, I wondered how old she was a couple of times. And the age in middle grade is going to like really denote how voice works, because it's so age dependent. So again, I just had a note about the margin notes. I don't know whether they should all be red or they should be, meticulously color coded, but I feel like you want to like make sure that So the narrative ends here, and then you have a bunch of margin notes. You want them to know that, oh, those are the margin notes, and then I skip ahead here to the next narrative portion. So I really like this hint of premise, which is, and sometimes when it was a nice day, she'd help me play with the ghosts. She'd call forth the spirits, and then we'd play hide and seek or follow the leader. They always cheat when we'd play hide and seek. I can't go invisible like they can, but soon, really, really soon, I'll be able to see ghosts all on my own. I really liked that. So here just was a little stylistic thing, and it's just me. So it has intentional repetition. I'm going to be a medium, just like Gran was. I'm going to talk to the ghosts and help them cross over. I'm going to help people see their family. I don't know if a kid would have intentional repetition like that. A part of me just kind of itched to vary the sentence structure, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on. It's probably fine. But that was just a thought I had. So here, this is just a line and a detail I really love, but that really made me wish I knew how old she was. The doctor said she was very sick. He said a lot of long words that I don't know how to spell. He said cancer. I know how to spell that one. I think that's lovely. Oh, this is my next note. Okay, so I've lived with Gran my whole life at the funeral home. I also love that this is set at a funeral home. It gives me my girl vibes because I'm old. Wunder Funeral Home or Wunder Funeral Home and Cemetery. It's this big old yellow brick building that kind of looks like an old-timey mansion. So my note here is I kind of know what that means, but what is the context that a kid would have? Let's say she's 8 years old. What does an 8-year-old think an old-timey mansion is? I would find ways here to both give context to the reader while also simultaneously, it's a double whammy, characterizing your main character. I spitballed some examples like use a pop culture reference. Those can be dangerous, but that's kind of one way. Or it's like, did Gran once try to explain to her the architectural history of the house and she kind of tuned her out and now she wishes she hadn't? I don't know. But what does old-timey mansion mean to a modern, well, regardless of where it's set, like, what does that mean? I just was curious because I know my mental picture and I don't know if a current child, middle grade reader would have the same reference points. Just a thought. So I didn't have specific notes here. I liked reading all this backstory about the mortuary. I love the idea of having a map of the house and the funeral home in the journal. I think that's great. That's a great little margin note. Got backstory about her parents dying and her cousin Ophelia, her grand being in the hospital and the doodles. I really like that a lot. And that's the thing. I think it's such an interesting format. I think it can be used to great effect, but it's very tricky to pull off. That's the hard part. So here, so you have all this backstory, and then we have more margin notes. And the margin notes are, one person says, the hospital was so scary. I remember thinking the hallways always felt like a big white maze. And again, I'm not entirely sure who that is. I think it's Ophelia. Blue ink, which I think is Caroline, is, yeah, that's why I hate hospitals. And black is probably not the only reason. So you're definitely teasing something here. But this is the point where I was just like, why are these two girls messaging back and forth in the other one's private journal? You need to find a way to explain that. Is that a thing? Annotating a journal and sharing it with another person just is a little bit unusual. And so I think you're going to have to work to explain that. Here, she's talking more about her grandmother. There are so many memories of Gran that I don't have anymore because I didn't write them down. Oh, God, that just hurts in my soul. Oh, so true. Stuff I don't know I should remember. Like all the funny things she'd say or how she'd brush my hair, even when it hurt like crazy. I just pulled this out as a great example where you could just insert a little bit of detail. Like, why did it hurt like crazy? Did she have tangles or curls? Does she have 4C hair? Like, just, you could definitely insert a nice little character detail here as to why it hurt and describe her. Okay, so those are kind of the last of my specific notes. So my main thought coming on the end of this, as I mentioned, I like the middle grade voice. As far as I understand middle grade, it feels very appropriate and right. I like all the character details. I feel for this girl. It's just all the context of the format that I think really needs to be lampshaded, explained. And I did wonder, and I'm going to stop sharing and come back to the chat. I just wondered more than once. There you are. Hi. Yeah. So, that is really, really hard because it means you have to potentially have people be very, very, very confused for half a book and they might not read that far. I don't know if, as far as an agent is concerned, it's just telling them in some way in the query to get them to read, but something about it, I'm just like, I need some context. And Carolyn says, I shared a journal in middle school. Like, is it having a margin note that lampshades what they're doing? You know, like, it's just, you don't, for me, it took 5 pages before I was like, I don't understand why this is happening. I'm also not a regular middle grade reader, and you do need to bear that in mind. But those are the things that I think of, and it just made me wonder more than once, could it have a framing device? Could it start with normal narration, then transition to the journal device? And then, like, could you have a mix of both? Like, these are the thoughts I have, but also an agent who is experienced in non-traditional kidlit formats is going to know way more than me. And I would definitely explain as much as possible in the query so that they have context. Yeah. So yeah, this is why I suggest this is what the publisher will do. This is a design phase thing. You don't have to decide what the fonts are. Definitely don't stylize the fonts in the manuscript, but you can play so much with font styles to indicate personality. Yeah. Scrolling comments, I'm going backwards. Like, I love the idea. I love drawings. I think it's so brilliant. I just think I'm less clear on why they're writing back and forth. Maybe think a ghostwriter because I'm very old. Yeah, once this has processed, I will add timestamps so that it's easy to watch back. That's a very good idea. And I'll link to everyone's channels who has a channel, as I mentioned. Yeah, sorry, I'm just scrolling back. But yeah, I mean, I don't read a lot of middle grade, but I could just tell that it had like a hooky premise, and I like the voice, and I just love that it said at a funeral home. So here, y'all go so fast there. How do you even find that balance of not giving too much information but giving just enough to keep your reader intrigued? You're usually not going to nail it on the first go. I certainly don't. Just write it one way, the way you have to in the first draft. In your next edit, pull way back. I always have way too much at the beginning of the book. Give it to different readers, CPs and stuff, and ask them if they have questions. Ask them anytime they're confused. And that's when you know, well, ask them 2 questions. When are you confused and when are you bored? If they're bored, you're navel gazing too much, probably, and info dumping too much. If they're confused, you don't have enough information. It's hard. And also, I just read books. And when I read a book and they do it really, really well, I like make a mental note. I'm like, that was very smart how they did that. So, alrighty. Let's just do some Q&A before we wrap up. Do you guys have questions about any of this? Allison wrote that last one, so you can follow her on Twitter. And anyone who doesn't have an agent by January should enter Author Mentor Match. Yeah. But specifically with opening pages, since that's what I did, as you can see, the kind of things I noted, anything that would cause someone to stop, express confusion, or their eyes glaze over, you want to cut that stuff. You want to be careful. But it's also, I should have found one that was too fast-paced. I didn't see one, because that can also be a problem. Gosh, lots of different, there's so many different kinds of problems. All right. I'm going to give you a couple minutes and then I think 2.5 hours is more than enough. I'm also starving. So these books get published. They definitely exist. I'm just saying a copy editor is going to fix your Britishism, specifically grammar. You can't have British grammar in an American book. Words, maybe, not grammar. Like commas and stuff, punctuation. They're going to copy edit that to American standards. And then they're just published different ways in different countries. So, hey, yeah, guys, shout out your channels. If you're in the chat and you have a channel, like promote yourself. Here. I'm always happy to talk about my eyeshadow, sadly. I used this palette today, the So Jaded Kathleen Lights palette. It's so pretty. Looks like that. And I used the stuff down here. I was going for like a peacock kind of look because I did it a few days ago for a video in this same top, actually, my Author Tube Secrets video. And I wanted to repeat it. So, because I really liked it. I will say I tried to do a look to match a different dress and I failed at it twice. So I'm still figuring out how to use some of these color combinations, but I am not afraid of a purple eyeshadow look. Like I'm fine with that. So and yes, I'll do this again. The critiques take so much more prep time, so it's going to be less. Sorry, I will, but I still have so many that you guys submitted that I flagged to go through. But chats, I do trad pub talks semi-regularly with other trad pub YouTube people. We don't have the next one scheduled, but like every couple weeks we're like, hey, you want to do a live chat? I'm definitely planning on doing one. This is actually helpful. Lindsay Puckett and I are going to do one with Michelle Schusterman and JL just about middle grade. I'm mostly going to be there as like a tell me more moderator type. I'll manage the comments. Those three are going to talk about their expertise in middle grade. So if you are a middle grade writer, I feel like there's just not enough information in chat about middle grade on YouTube and in general Kid Lit. YA tends to overshadow everything. So we are planning on that. And then I can actually tell you, I am going to do kind of a book club, kind of. There is a thriller that came out and I have been dying to talk about it, like a spoiler discussion with other people and specifically writers. So if we're figuring out the date, but we're gonna do it's I don't want to call it a book club though, because that's really a booktube thing. We're going to discuss a recent thriller as writers and readers, because we're obviously also readers. I mean, it's One by One by Ruth Ware. I want to talk about it, so I'm going to with a couple of author tubers. So I'm definitely streaming more than I used to. There are streaming opportunities to chat in the comments with each other, and I also highly recommend, if you like chatting with me, join Thirsty Thursday. It's alternately always on Laura Writes or Kevin the Writer's channel. I, whenever possible, try to be there in the chat. Like I watch them, and we have a good community in the chat. There's like there's a group of us who consistently are there on Thursdays at 4:30 PT. So that's a great place to go if you want to have a regular live stream with a lot of the same people. I see a lot of the same people because we're a little community. So I'm trying to get more into live streaming. I might try to do some word sprints in November. So just as a note, I did not intentionally schedule this for the same time as the Worldwide Write-a-thon. I didn't know when it was when I scheduled this. So my apologies for that. Not intentional. Here's the thought. I mean, I could do more in smaller sections, but I do worry that doing that few might be less dynamic for people. I need to think about it, especially knowing how this went. I'm gonna basically analyze everything and figure out how I'm gonna do it going forward. Yeah, it's One by One by Ruth Ware. And the thing is, that's also the Literally Dead book club choice. It's the October book, but it means that their stream's going to be in November. So I'm hoping that means a ton of people are reading it already. I'm not meaning to steal any thunder from that book club because trust me, our discussion is going to be very, very different. I just really want to talk about that book. And like, no, since no one invited me to a book club, I made one just to talk about that book. But we'll probably do some other thrillers because I definitely have craft. Like, I feel like we're going to look at craft in a way that a booktube channel isn't. And so there are two different dimensions to discussing a book. And I'm excited to do that. Yeah, I had to look up some very specific ski stuff where I was like, what is that? Because I am not fancy. And you know I've never been skiing in the Swiss Alps or the French Alps, wherever it is. Yes, I will send you your notes. And yeah, and when I email you, I'll ask you if you're okay with sharing because I could make the notes available to people. So cool. This would be painful to do a live review without going through them prior. I would have to read on screen, and we process words differently when we read them out loud versus when we read them on screen. And I don't process as well when I read out loud. And it would be very difficult for me to gather my thoughts and make coherent notes. You want to talk about a long live stream that's painful. That would be painful. I feel. Oh, so Becca's cool too. So that's at least 3 that I can share. I don't know if I'm allowed to share my official release date. It's definitely like, I think I can say May 2021 without getting in trouble. It's May 2021. I just don't know if I'm allowed to share my date. And my cover allegedly should be dropping this month. Allegedly. We'll see soon. ARCs too. So yeah, let's wrap up. Sorry, I'm still scrolling comments again. So I want another person because it's the most awkward thing ever. Dead air. I just read comments. This is an interesting question. Would I ever do plot critiques? Maybe. I will say I can often spot issues from a synopsis. Always, but not. Although my hesitation there. Okay. I actually was thinking of making a video, like I have it on my outline list of how much about your book should you share online? Because I personally really hesitate to share too much about my work, which is a personal choice. I'm hesitant to share the entire plot of someone else's book. Stealing isn't normal. It's not that common, and yet it's still a thing. I hesitate to reveal too much. I don't know. So I might be wary of doing that in terms of wanting to protect other people's stories and ideas. So. For this first paragraph critique, I am planning on doing a video on first lines, which would then lend itself to probably a live first lines critique. First, you're right. It probably would be first paragraph because you sometimes need a few lines. But yeah, that is definitely a possibility. But it's only helpful for one specific thing, if that makes sense. The reason I did multiple pages for this is and not just one, is anyone can polish up just the first page, literally 250 words. The problems almost always reveal themselves on the second or third page. And it's great to polish up your first page, but if you're losing the agent on 2 or 3, that's what you actually need to know, if that makes sense. And that's why I did longer samples, because I wanted this to be as useful as humanly possible to hopefully as many people as possible. Because the whole reason I did this is when I make craft videos, I try to make up examples, and sometimes my examples are horrible. Like the spitballing ideas I have of this is a way to demonstrate how not to write something. Not that it's all about how not to write something, it's more subjective than that. But I'm bad at it, I feel. And that's the reason I wanted to do real examples, because real examples are never just like, this is bad and wrong. It's like, oh, this is written this way. And it's communicating this to me, and I don't think that's the intention. Try this. And it's so much easier to use real writing, and real writing that I didn't write, because I know my intention. It's harder to confuse myself, basically. So, yeah. I did a video in the dark ages about whether you should submit to Pitch Wars, and I've done informational videos about author mentor match. I've also done a video on how to be a good mentee. Actually, that is worth a watch, because that is one where I basically explain, like, it's basically whether you should or shouldn't submit to a mentorship. Things like it's not fair to the mentor if you're not going to edit, for example. Yeah. Aw. I'm going to add timestamps. Someone gave that excellent suggestion, so you can watch the playback and you can jump to the different critiques. So, all right. So yeah, this is on my video ideas. I probably am going to make it, but it might be a little rambly because I have very half-formed thoughts about it. But I guess half-formed thoughts are some of the most interesting ones. I hesitate to give people definitive, like, advice on that, prescriptive advice, because it really is person to person. I'm just very private about the stuff I write, and the specifics I like to talk about. So here's a good question. Do you think it's fine to use words that readers might not understand because you want them to not understand, making them feel out of place because they're not posh? That can definitely be a stylistic choice, and it can work very, very well in certain books. At the same time, you don't want to be overly obtuse with your language. I'd say you can only get away with this a few times or sometimes. And make sure it's organic, that it's organic to your writing, if that makes sense. I've definitely used fancy words unintentionally because that's just the word that I use. And I've had an editor be like, huh, I looked this up. This is legit, but didn't know this word. Like, make sure it's organic. Make sure it's not like, I went to thesaurus.com and found the most obtuse word I could possibly find. You have to be thoughtful about it. So, but also definitely consider the POV. A posh character would use certain words that a less posh character wouldn't use. I have redone some of my old videos already. A couple of commenters did call me out, like, you already made a video in this. I'm like, yes, I know. Most people won't notice. Because I've redone a couple of staple topics that I did very early on, but comparatively just it didn't make much of a splash, understandably, because they're old, my lighting sucks, I'm stiff in them, and so they only have a couple thousand views, and I have redone them, so... Maybe I should private the old ones, but I haven't. But yeah, I've started rehashing some of my oldest videos, like 2017. I am stilted in this video, and I just do a rehash on it. So I have done it. But if you have requests for that, I am open to refreshing video topics, because I'm just so much better at videos now. I'm better at speaking. I'm better at editing. So... I will continue to go through what I have. So you don't need to resubmit. The only exception to that is if you already did like real rewrites to your beginning and you really want to send them to me, just respond to the same email chain. Two of the ones I picked for this had already done some rewrites, and it was really, really helpful to get those new pages because they'd already addressed some of the notes that I had. So. I think you guys are talking about selling on pitch. Yeah, if you're established and famous and best-selling, yeah, you can literally sell on pitch, but that's for famous people or people who already have books. And it's basically the editor has to know your writing style, know they already like your writing, and know that you're capable of writing a good book, and then you can sell on pitch. Yes. Anytime you switch to a new POV, it is like a new introduction. You don't want to repeat information, but you do want to be thoughtful about basically how it is a first introduction for that character, so you have to do just as much work to introduce that character, if that makes sense. It is like 2 openings, but they don't you don't want them to feel overly repetitious. All right. Submissions are technically closed. I can't handle more than the 300 that I have. I will reopen for a different critique later. There will be a separate call. It might be the first paragraph's idea, but I will do more critiques in the future. So. My eternal advice on any pitch or mentorship contest that cross up is research their bona fides. Always look up the credentials of the person running the program. Do they have an agent? If they have an agent, you have to do all of the same research you would do to vet an agent. Make sure they have a good agent. I personally would not advise trusting the program or being mentored by anyone who is repped by a schmagent. They are not going to be able to best guide you in your work. I know that I have I guess I have high standards, but that is my personal opinion. Don't take advice from someone who hasn't gotten in their career or isn't on their way to their career to where you want to go. Lots of mentorship things cropping up, and they run the gamut. Really research not just the person running it, but all of the mentors. So it's just do your research, do your due diligence, because it's real. It's just like being an agent. Anyone can theoretically start a mentorship program. They're very hard to run. So honestly, yeah. So just be careful. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, honestly, with working with critique partners. You don't want to work, or an editor. You don't want to work with someone who's going to give you feedback that, like, you don't trust. That's just kind of like you end up spinning your wheels on your manuscript. You want to be very, very smart about how you invest your time when it comes to critiques and revision and all that jazz. I only went into the pages, but I will say pitches that gave me context helped me navigate the pages. I definitely will end up doing query critiques separately. So, because I love query critiques and it's easier to do more of them. So, yeah. You can submit anything you want. Honestly, this isn't rules like querying. If you are welcome to resubmit things, same project. I'm not fussy. Because sometimes it's also just like, I got so much, there was so much to choose from. So it's just kind of, that's why there is more to go through. I do think at a certain point you have to rip off the Band-Aid and just send it out, but still be thoughtful about who you send it to. Because a bad critique can really derail you if it's the wrong match for a critique partner. So. Okay, I am going to wrap this up because it's been 2 hours and 42 minutes. What is wrong with me? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. This was definitely getting a feel for how this is going to work. Now I know that 9 takes 2.5 hours. I know I need a mod in the chat. I kind of want to do this with another person so that there's less dead air and it's easier for me to read. We're going to figure it out. So thank you so much. You can drop further questions or comments, etc., into the comments once this is all done. I will put things down in a pinned comment, the stuff that I promised that has flitted out of my brain, but I promised you things. Timestamps, promise you timestamps. I will do that. And then I if I can share the edited samples with everyone, I will share what I can with you guys so that you can look at it. So everyone have an amazing Saturday, amazing weekend. Y'all are great writers. I was genuinely impressed with things that came through. I have a promising label in the inbox and there's a ton of stuff in it, promising to critique. So If you're doing your word sprints, go back to your word sprints. I'm sorry to have taken you away. Right. Everyone, right? Watch for my next lives that are going to be scheduled. The next one is probably going to be that book discussion, which is not quite the same as a regular Q&A. But seriously, if you want to catch me in chat, Thirsty Thursday, Laura and Kevin's channels. I'm usually in there as just a regular community chatter. So yeah, thank you so much. Bye, guys.